What is up, everybody? Welcome back to The Crucible. My name is Nick, and I am joined today by none other than Yiorgos from Fab Chaos himself to do this massive undertaking that is the full set review for Bright Lights. We've had the entire set drop earlier today, and we're trying to rush this out as fast as we possibly can to get it out to you guys. Constructed is going to be on my channel. You're watching it right now, and you can find the limited stuff in Yiorgos' channel, Fab Chaos on YouTube. Links and everything is going to be down in the description. Make sure you go check him out, like the videos, give them a subscribe, because there's going to be a ton of information for you guys. This has been a lot of work to put together, and I certainly hope that you find this helpful for either pre-release, the constructed events coming up. ProQuest season is right around the corner. So let's get right to it. I want to say hi, Yiorgos.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Thanks for having me, Nick.
All right, great for you to be here. All right, we're gonna start with numerical order for the set. We're doing this again for both constructed, Blitz in the same video, and then Yiorgos' video is going to be on limited. The first thing we're going to do is explain our rating system a little bit, because it's important to know what each grade means. So S tier for stuff is going to be your absolute necessities for most decks. Think of things like Codex, Tunic, CNC, that type of thing that really would shape the deck and the whole plan around it. You need to keep those cards in mind, both in your deck and for what the opponent's going to be doing. That's our S tier. A is going to be cards that are very good. You generally want most of your deck to consist of 8 cards. You don't want below rate cards. They're going to be pushing your plan forward. Your B cards are good, but they're mostly filler, like the glue that holds the deck together, some of your blues, and general tools that the deck more so needs to run to function rather than needs to run to win. C tier is going to be outliers that most of the time you're not going to see in constructed decks, but maybe sometimes there might be a reason to see a couple of those cards. The D tier means that no deck currently exists that could want this card. It's usually mostly going to be for limited. Think of your yellows. They're mostly just your filler draft chaff, that type of thing. And finally we have our F tier, which will consist of all the cards that really don't need to exist. We don't have heroes that could ever want those cards. Think of things like Regicide or Tome of Aetherwind. They're kind of bad. We don't want them in our decks or to exist in general, so we're giving them an F. Finally, we have the X tier, which this is going to be our sideboard cards, things that we don't want to run in the main deck, but we do want to see in a sideboard slot should the meta require their existence. We are also going to have an R, which is for reprints, but we're going to see why we'll have that rating later. So let's just jump right into the first card, which is the Fabled of the set. We have Master Cog, which I'm sure the name will not be memed about for eternity, but I guess I've talked long enough. Yiorgos, do you want to share your thoughts for this first?
Okay, so I really like the direction that LSS is giving us with the new Fables, and Master Cog is a prime example of that. It's, first of all, regarding the rating, I would put it around C, but there are very specific reasons for that, and mainly is that it has an above rate power level. When this is pitched, you may put a steam counter on an item you control with Crank. So let's say in a vacuum this should get at least 1 value, so having a yellow card that gets, you know, a card that gets 3, maybe more under very specific circumstances, is a really interesting card to exist, but is by no means a card that you must have in order to run a deck, or a card that, you know, really pushes forward some interaction. So it's an interesting card, but at first glance I don't think, unless very specific meta games show up, I don't think you will need this card in any of the decks that are supposed to coming out of the new set.
Yeah, I agree. It's most of the time it's going to be a worse blue. You need to get the function of that steam counter to be more than a single resource, and the fact that it only works on crank items makes it very, very fringe in terms of the decks that can run it and can make use of it. You need to make more than one resource worth of value with that Steam counter, which isn't going to be the easiest thing. So I'm with you on the C.
There are some interactions and there are some cards that make it worthwhile. That, I mean, there are a lot of items that if stay on board will give you more value, but at the moment at least, I do not think we have the critical mass of that powerful items for Master Cog to justify a slot in your deck.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so a card that will hopefully see a lot more play than the Fabled, a new Dash IO. So you can look at the top card of your deck at any point. You can go to time by doing that all the time during your games. So the more important thing is that you get to play the top card of your deck at instant speed if it is an item with cost 0 or 1 by paying an additional resource for it. This is a once per turn instant, so both your turn and the opponent's. 4 intellect like most of the heroes, and 36 life total, which is that LSS telling us that she's on par with Icelander, maybe?
So it's always, as you said, really important to note when LSS decides to give a hero less than 40 hit points and, 20 in Blitz. And even though the effect seems weird at first glance, first of all, it's an effect that's really open, and we've seen a lot of heroes to, break the game when they have effects that are so widely accessible. Like Islander, you can do this effect every single turn, like a great example like you gave, like Icelander. So there is an insane amount of potential in Dash IO, in the constructed aspect of Bright Lights.
Yeah, I've seen some people try the aggressive builds with more of the aggressive items. There's some late game loops with the protocols and the scrap cards that keep recurring things. But it's obviously very early to tell what shape the deck is going to take. But I think it's going to be one of those decks that, just like Icelander, took a while to reach that final form that really dominated. I think this is that hero from this set. I think this will take the most time for people to figure out that most optimal build. But obviously I would definitely keep my eye on this hero because it seems like the one that has the highest ceiling potentially out of the three.
There are some really interesting interaction also with Dash. That's the hardest part actually to evaluate. That's why I think everybody that has been building decks with Dash so far has a hard time. It's to evaluate the utility, because you can actually use that on the opponent's turn, or you could put an item into play from the top of your deck with Crank and get an extra action point. Is that relevant? We don't really know yet, and it's exactly what you said, that at some point I also think that Dash might have, an ultimate form deck, like exactly what happened with Islander and Wounding Bull, for instance, or Final's Fighting Spirit. Someone will crack the code on that hero.
Yeah. All right. So the young version of Dash database. Personally, I don't think in Blitz she has the time to set up the stuff that she can in CC. And also, we see that the original Dash is such a prominent feature of the Blitz metagame because she starts with effectively a 10-point life difference than this, 6 on Teklo Pounder and the 4th health life difference. So in Blitz, database needs to somehow get 10 points worth of value in like the first 3 turns. Otherwise, she's worse than the original Dash. So I don't know if she can get there in Blitz specifically. At least not now.
Yes, and exactly as you said, most of the time Blitz has been dominated by really fast strategies, and really fast strategists exist. And for Dash to get her once per turn value out of items with the top of her deck and stuff, she probably needs more time than what she can get in Blitz. So I don't think we will see a lot of Dash database being played or dominating mostly the Blitz format or the skirmish season that we might have later this year or next year.
Yep. Yep. Hopefully we're wrong, but for now, I think that's where we stand. So her weapon, Symbiosis Shot. It's certainly a similar yet very different than the weapon we've had for mechs. It's 2 shots, but we don't have to load this manually, but it is also not a pistol. So we can't do the pistol plan that the original dash could. But what we can do is load and shoot this for free by playing items, which is kind of what we want to do. This enables some crazy stuff that you can banish all your item cards, put them back into play, crank everything, load this, 3, 4, 5 times, and then shoot all of them at the same turn. Or you can just get free value out of playing a card, playing an instant speed item off the top, cranking it, gaining that resource. It automatically loads a pistol, and you get free 2 damage out of it just in that turn without needing to spend any more resources. What are your thoughts, Yiorgos?
It's actually, I think, a part of the reason. First of all, I don't think you can ever build a DAS deck, the new DAS, without running Symbiosis Shot, because I honestly think that the extra taxing cost of DAS's activate ability that she needs to pay 1 every turn Symbiosis Shot is a reason for that, and Symbiosis Shot is the payoff that you actually want to play items off the top of your deck, because items will simply load your weapon, and it honestly does not have a lot of restrictions. If you notice, it's just an action to remove a Steam counter and attack, and not only that, but you can also use it more than once per turn, and exactly as you said, you need to pay nothing. So there could be some really interesting interaction with Symbiosis Shot and items down the line. I don't think we are there yet, but it's really important to note a card from a set earlier, the kegs, that actually require the weapon to be a gun. And that's something important to know, that it doesn't have the pistol synergies, but it has the gun synergies, even though the gun synergies at the moment are not so great.
Yep. I would give this a B as far as a Mechanologist weapon is concerned. It's obviously the best weapon for Dash IO right now, but overall I don't think the original Dash wants to use this. She has a very, very different plan. So yeah, the aggro one. I think this is Yiorgos' favorite, or Teklo, but we're gonna get to that in a bit.
Okay, so Max did Hype Nitro. Once per turn action, pay 2, create a Hyperdriver token with 2 Steam counters. Activate this ability only if you've boosted this turn. Hyperdrivers you control get Crank. Crank means as it enters the arena, you may remove a Steam counter from it. If you do, gain an action point. So exactly as you said, he's the aggressive guy. This guy is looking to boost a lot and use his ability and get more Hyperdrivers, get more resources for next turn, do even more explosive turns, and of course, ultra fast summon the Nitro Mechanoid, which is an insane and big part of his game plan in Constructed, I think. And it's probably one of his biggest strengths. I honestly, out of the 3 new heroes we have, I give Max, the Hype Nitro, the highest potential of being a top contender for the new Constructed set. For the 2 new Constructed metagame.
Yeah. For sure, the aggressive capabilities of Max, even before putting out the Mechanoid, is just crazy, especially with the new boost stuff that we've gotten. You can do crazy lines with a new Twin Drive with a double boost card you're going to see later. Much easier to get maximum velocities out there, and in general, you're not going to be starved for resources either. Usually you can get away with maybe even playing pitchless during the turn. You just start off with a 0 cost, like a 0 to 60, and to kickstart all your drivers, get some resources from there, and just keep going. That is just extremely powerful. People have referred to him as the Mech Fi, basically because of this reason. You can just dump your hand on the board, but you also have that early, mid, late game potential of just slamming down that Mechanoid and just going crazy.
And also I think that it's a really interesting part for Max on the deck building aspect, that it gives off the Fi vibes we had when Fi first appeared in the format, where everybody was like, yeah, you can just play that hero pitchless, What happens if you get a blue? You just pitch it and you activate his hero power, and then you attack with a weapon that we will get in a bit. But the curve smooths out so easily and so naturally in the core kit of the hero that it's like it's built to be a really aggressive deck.
Indeed. All right, so having seen the adult, we can see the Blitz version of the hero. It's everything we've said before still stands now. It's an aggressive hero. It fits the Blitz format. You want to be fast. You want to do things quickly and just slam a bunch of damage. So the fairest comparison would be to the original Dash. What does Max Nitro do that Dash doesn't? Again, the original Dash starts with 6 damage on the board. Does Max's ability to put hyperdrivers into play make up for this difference? Is this something that would change what you do with Max? Again, Mechanoid, I think, is going to be that major player for those two decks.
Yeah, if Max Nitro in Blitz has a way to actually make an ultra fast Mechanoid, I don't think anybody can live through a Mechanoid transformation, even with 0 other support. I don't think any hero in Blitz can survive 7 attacks of a Mechanoid with 20 hit points. You cannot really survive that. So the only difference between running Max Nitro or the original Dash in Blitz has to be, is it viable enough? Do you have the time to actually set up a Nitro Mechanoid? If not, probably you should be boosting with old Dash, not Max Nitro.
Yeah. And his weapon, Banksy, or Bonksy, because you know you're bonking people on the head with it. It's max specialization. You can't really use it anywhere else, but I don't think you'd want to, even if it wasn't a specialization. But once per turn action, you can spend a resource to attack with it for 3. And but you can only activate this if you've cranked this turn. So you either need to have played an item with crank, which I don't think you're going to be playing any items in the max deck, but maybe, I don't know. But usually it would be with the hyperdrivers that you put into play. They have crank, you remove a counter, and then you get to attack with this, and you get the value, hopefully, of connecting with it because you get that steam counter back on that hyperdriver. I can see Max in Constructed not wanting to run this weapon in favor of perhaps a Hanabi Blaster if you're going to be that super aggressive deck. But if you're going for more of the Mechanoid build earlier or stuff like that, maybe you don't have time to get value out of having the Hanabi Blaster at all because you're going to be banishing it under Mechanoid.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you want to include the Mechanoid in your kit, Bansky is a really great weapon. And again, the whole aggressive thing I've said before with the blues and pitching a blue to make a hyperdriver and swing with Bansky, the value is really great. Even though you can, though, I think most max decks will prefer to choose Bansky over another mid-range plan with old pistol or, you know, exactly what you said, Hanabi Blaster as a more aggressive approach. Because I think Bansky can fit a bit in both ways unless we see a very aggressive version or a very defensive version of Max for some reason. That's the reason why I think I'll give this card a B, because I think that 80% of the Maxes will only have in their list that weapon, nothing else.
Alright. Moving on to the third and final hero. Teklovasen, Esteemed Magnate. The first hero we had spoiled for this set. And I don't know, is Odin, defensive Odin back? Maybe, maybe not. Yiorgos is certainly happy about that possibility. But we get to have extra cards. Oh yeah, there he is. We get to play with extra cards from, not our deck this time, but from our Banish Zone. We get to play EVOs out of there. We're going to take a look at the EVOs in a little bit, but we can also play them at instant speed by playing 3 extra resources. And if we get to play an EVO that way, we also get to draw a card, kind of refunds that pitch cost on top of the item cost. Overall, first glance, I think this hero has many different avenues to be built. You can go the full EVO plan with the big EVOs, the Steel Soul EVOs that get you that value out of building on top of other base EVOs to get those triggers, building all the way up to the Singularity bomb card, or you can rush to put down your instant speed EVOs to just play the EVO upgrades super early and get that 3 for 9 value out of those Majestics. It's super interesting to see how all of it comes together, especially now that we do exist in a wizard meta, because running EVOs and having AB is a kind of a contradicting game plan. So figuring that strategy out now, I think is going to be a bit more difficult than perhaps after Icelander says her goodbyes and joins the rest of the elemental heroes.
So Teklevosen at first glance is looking like he wants to be a slow deck that wants to get blocked with a lot of EVOs and having a lot of ways to banish them and get them for free and play them as an instant and get all these value slow game plan, while at the later stages of the game will dominate the opponent either because of the huge payoffs he has when he has 3 or 4 EVOs, or what you said with Singularity that almost instantly ends the game when it hits the board. And it's, first of all, it's a really interesting concept and a really interesting hero, because it's really weird in Flesh and Blood. How can you build a control deck, or what effect does a hero need for it to have a slower game plan? And so far we've only seen like the control does, or maybe Oldheim, but maybe, you know, the Icelander with Curses, but it's the first time we actually see a hero that's gather the pieces, you know, gather the pieces, and you become more and more powerful. And also Teklevosen honestly is a great hero for the future on Flesh and Blood, because right now we can only look at Teklevosen through the spectrum of the EVOs we have access to. A new EVO suit could completely change the way we look at this deck. I mean, or, you know, a new way of banishing cards off the top of your deck again could completely instantly change the way we see this deck. That's why I'm so excited about trying out Teklevosen, and I really like what he brings to the game. I really hope that what you said is a real problem of Teklevosen, the fact that because you need to run EVOs, you need your equipment to be base equipment, and base equipment do not have arcane barrier, so that's actually going to be a real problem for Teklevosen. But even if he's not a big part of the meta game that's going to come in the next few months, I'm super excited for what Teklevosen brings to Flesh and Blood as in a spectrum in general.
Yes, I think it's going to be that quintessential late game deck that builds up its board, similar to how a full pistol plan dash would just block, play an item, and just go to the end game where you've assembled all your little toys and get to dominate that late game situation. I think this is the space that Teklevosen will also operate in, especially because the way that the opponents can interact with your equipment is quite limited right now. At least there's not too many ways to disrupt what he's doing other than out aggroing the plan, basically, because it is going to be quite expensive to get some of those EVOs in play, as we're going to see in a bit. But let's take a look at the young version of Teklevosen. Again, not much has changed, but as we have talked about before, we can play that ultra fast, put everything down, and just slam big attacks that force the opponent to interact with them. They're going to make them discard, lose their arsenal, or just be so far above rate that that's how you get your aggressiveness in before the opponent, or Singularity.
Yeah, it's again in Blitz. I think Teklevosen might have a spot to sign for the same reason that Max and maybe Das sign. It could be either an aggressive deck that has of a mid-range plan, because if you turbo boost and create, you know, get these EVOs for free, it might change the math. But I don't see again Teklevosen being a huge part of the metagame, because if boost Mechanologist is a great deck, probably you're looking to play the original dash, not try to spice things up. If that type of deck is good, why not just play the old dash? If old dash becomes living legend at some point in Blitz, that might change, but at least at the moment of recording, that's not the case.
All right, the weapon for Teklovasen, well, actually it's the only one not being a specialization, so technically others could play it. So if we ever wanted to play Evos in some other deck, this is there. I don't know why we would do that right now, but it's a nice option to have. In the beginning, this doesn't do anything, but as you get more and more of your pieces down, it starts having value. The way that I see it mostly is sort of a way that you can use that final card in your hand that you didn't block with during the opponent's turn. Just swing with this for some free value, and then just keep going, trying to assemble your plan. It's kind of what Dash was doing with her pistol plan. If she ended up with a single card in hand that she couldn't do anything, she would load a few items, maybe pop a shot or something like that, and then pass it back. I think this is going to serve a similar purpose in Teklovasen in the early game, and then in the late game maybe get some go again value that way.
Yeah, I think Teklo Leveler is a really interesting weapon, and I think you said the most important part, that it's not a Teklovasen specialization. So at some point, the Mechanologist deck building really opens, because it's the obvious thing that you want to play that on Teklovasen, but the fact that you can actually even try it on other Mechanologists, at some point we might see some wacky decks, and that's really fun. But apart from that, I don't ever see Teklovasen running any other weapon, even though his curve doesn't really like having a one cost, let's say the perfect scenario 3 go again weapon, because most of his cards cost 3, we will get that in a bit. But it's still, the value is still so great that, there is not really a better option that gives you so much.
So, Teklovasen has a weapon, hero, but he also has a specialization, which is Singularity. This was spoiled quite early on with that EVO Still Soul set, but we didn't quite know what it did. And then we found out, and everyone went nuts. Why did that happen?
It was the first time we actually ever see such a powerful effect to ever exist in Flesh and Blood, because when we first saw Teklovasen, everybody was expecting that, okay, you have that slow game plan, that you slowly build your, EVO equipment, but what are you doing in the late game? You just do these huge attacks for good value, okay, but is that even good? No. Singularity. The payoff of the payoffs. We've never seen a card with so much power on a single card. A 6 power, 6 armor card that for 3 attacks, and whenever you attack the opponent discards a card. And do not forget that, we will get that at some point, it triggers again every single EVO you transformed out of. This card is insane. A lot of games will just be, I play Singularity and the opponent will just scoop his card instantly, because the game is probably over. And honestly, for me, it's super exciting to actually have access to these cards. Everybody loves playing powerful cards, and finally, we have the most powerful card of all so far. The king of the power level in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, it's a 3-card card. It's a 3-card hand that wins the game by itself, especially if you have Steel Soul set down, you flip and you can attack twice with this. If you attack twice with this in the same turn, what does the opponent do? And you can do that off of 3 cards. You can block with 2 cards, have this in arsenal, pitch 2 blues, play it, attack twice in the same turn, forcing 2 discards on a 12 damage attack. What does the opponent do other than concede? I don't see what they can do, especially when you have, even if they survive, you have a 6 temper piece on the board in a deck full of block 3s. All you need to keep on your following turn is a single blue to just attack with it again. And just keep doing that forever until they die.
Also, don't forget, if you have the full 5 Steel EVOs equipped, you also get a 5-card hand the turn you play that.
Yeah, not only do you get to attack twice, you also get 5 cards to go again next turn. and one of them is also going to be a guaranteed EVO upgrade 3 for 9 with discard on hit and whatever else. It's just incredible. And go again, because we also have go again, because why not? I wanted to see what Shadow Mechanologist could do, because, oh, you banish off the top and then you do something with it. Well, this isn't quite it, but it still wins, so I'm not unhappy about it. So yes, a million. It's going to take obviously a lot of setup. You don't want a card that doesn't need setup to just win the game by itself. But it's such an incredible thing for the game. We saw Demi-Heroes first last set with Levia Redeemed, and we see the second iteration here with Teklovasen. Honestly, it makes so much sense both for flavor-wise and for the game plan itself. Like, yes, you're building this thing over the course of however many turns, but you are building up towards something. It's not just, oh, my attacks are better than they were before. It's, yes, my attacks are better than they were before, and also you die. So I think it's such an incredible payoff and just a win overall for the game. All right, let's get to the rest of the legendaries. Hyper X3, the helmet. It's a very interesting piece of gear because it requires such specific deck building that up to this point, Mechanologist had items, which were generics, didn't really have a specific reason to be put in that place other than they had good stats. They block for 2, you could cycle out your arsenal, your hand, or whatever the case might be. But with this, we get that block value of 1, which is great for mechanoid builds because we don't get to destroy this. We don't have to run crappy AB in a regular matchup. We get to run a battle-worn piece. But we also have that very interesting line of text, which I think I'll let Yiorgos just dive into a little bit more.
Okay, so Hyper X3 reads, whenever you banish a hyperdriver from boosting, you put the hyperdriver under this. Once per turn, when a hyperdriver is put under this, if there are 3 or more hyperdrivers under this, draw a card. So effectively, the first 2 times you boost a hyperdriver, pretty much nothing happens apart from hyperdrivers going under there, which is still good enough, we will get that in a bit. But the third time that thing happens, you draw a card. First of all, without any other interaction, these lines are insane. Having like 9 cards in your deck, in a deck that wants to boost all the time, and at the moment you boost the third of them, you start drawing free cards in your aggressive decks. The value already checks out. I mean, the value is already pretty great. If you draw, let's say, average on a game 1 card, that's effectively 4 value. That's 1 more value than Arcanite Skullcap, and Arcanite Skullcap was the best headpiece of the game for 3 years or something. And this card almost can pretty easily get more than that. This is insane. The main thing to notice here is that when you transform the Hyper X3, and at the moment the only way to do that is with Mechanoid, the extra hyperdrivers you have under this actually transform as well. So what that means is that you get even more activations with your Mechanoid, which is super relevant if you've ever played the old type of that deck.
So the card itself is, the drawing a card bit I don't think is going to come up that often. If it does, it's free value, it's a free card. Somebody did run the math for this. It's quite low because you do need to run suboptimal hyperdrivers in your deck to have that chance of boosting them away. So I don't know, that part of the card isn't why you would run this card. That is, I think, free value, and you would run it mostly for that banish underneath to have more attacks with that Mechanoid, and it is a blocking piece for the Mechanoid build that we didn't have previously. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works. Maybe there is some type of build with Dash that knows the top of her deck, but I think that's too many pieces to do cute things. It doesn't win the game. and you would want with this, you don't want to be playing bad cards to make your medium cards good. You want your medium cards to make your good cards better. So I think this is where this is going to exist. Other than that, mechs will still want to run that nice Crown of Providence, get that 2-block value, get their draw. All right, Teklo Foundry Heart has a reprint, so it's an R for a reprint. It's a great chest piece. If you have EVOs, you don't really want to run this, but it's good to have it again. New players are going to be coming to the game wanting to play Mechanologist, so putting more of this card out there is obviously great, and a great reprint policy by LSS.
I 100% agree. If you are looking to be a Mechanologist player, just grab one copy of Teklo Foundry Heart early and you will use it a lot.
Yep. Okay. This card. This card is exciting, but not because of what it does. It's more exciting because of what it represents. Right now, the most you can do with this is block for 3, which is decent in a slot that couldn't block 3 previously, like an arms slot that usually wasn't particularly contested in mechs. I can see this in maybe Blitz State at all. I don't know. That's not very good, but she has a bunch of items. She might get some free 3 blocks out of it. Why not? But that isn't why I think this is exciting. I think this is exciting because of that modular keyword and that ability to swap it around. Why would you want to do that? Currently, we don't really have much of a reason to do it, but I think when we do have a reason, it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting card for all the reasons you just said. At the moment, though, it's an iron rod on steroids that can get more than one slot. So there have been many cases with many Mechanologist decks that could use such type of card. I mean, you know, the Ultra Fatigue Gold Dash would probably run one copy of this card. It's decent, but it's a filler. It's still a good card, though. I mean, if you get your first copy of this card, don't throw it away. Keep the first copy of Adaptive Plating. You will use this card, even though it's not insanely powerful. And the galvanized side thing makes it a bit better for Dash, for the new Dash. But it's pretty easy to have a random item in your board as Mechanologist.
We're on what I think to be the best in slot for any type of EVO strategy cards. The Cogworks set is effectively the same as a set that you can get for Limited, the Proto Base head. It doesn't have any block value, so you can't get blown out by random T-bones and other stuff like that, or even Tomatize. And you get some free value with that ability that activates per boost. I think you just run this. If you're playing EVOs, you run these cards.
Yeah, there are some minor upsides to every single one of them of the Cogworks base equipment that you have if you are into a boosting deck. And probably if you are going to use some type of base equipment for all the reasons you just said, you're probably going to use Cogworks equipment. And even maybe you want some boost cards in your deck, in your Teklovossen deck for instance, to actually make some use of these effects, because compared to all of the other base equipment we have, they are literally the best in their slot as you described.
We can see that the Cogworks base head allows you to shuffle a Mechanologist attack action card from your banish zone into your deck. And again, this is the same for all of the cards, that you can only activate this after you've boosted, and you can only do this once because it requires that Steam counter that exists on that piece to work. You can't just do this a million times. You can only do the one. The chest piece, you get to get to resources, so it's kind of a one-time use Teklo Foundry Heart that doesn't need to banish cards off the top. So why not? That's pretty good. Arms piece, which I think once we get to look at some of the EVOs later, I think this arms piece might even run by itself with specific EVOs. You can spend the resource to give +1 to an attack. Might be relevant for some on hits that possibly could exist, like Combustible Courier. We don't have too many on hits, but yep. And
I have a minor note here, exactly as you said, that the Cogworks base arm are probably, if one of them are going to be used, probably the most playable will be Cogworks base arm. And the main reason is that we do not have any good arms mechanologist slot. So we might see a lot of mechanologist players actually try to use this card more and maybe even put some EVO equipment to go with it, because at the moment we do not have any super exciting mechanologist arm slot, and that's not the case with the chest, of course, that's not the case with boots, and on the headpiece there is always, exactly as you said, Guardian of Providence, or it's a pretty competitive slot. That's not the case with arms though, so that's the only reason why I think probably the arms base in general are slightly better compared to every other single equipment slot.
Yep. Finally, for this set, we have the legs that give you an action point. It's basically Achilles accelerators that doesn't destroy itself. So that could also be another reason to run this in a mechanoid build, because you do get that value of the action point without having to lose your legs piece. You also obviously don't have AB with this, but most of the time that AB is just kind of free value on accelerators. So I think this is also going to be, you know, a tier a bit above the chest and the head, a bit below the arms, but yeah.
I agree 100%.
All right, the next set that we have is the base head and chest, arms, all that stuff. It is the base set with blade break of 1. I think this is just draft options for if you have a slot that doesn't run another piece, because you don't really want to run this. You have no reason to run this, because if you're planning on putting some evos on top, you're not blocking, so might as well it not being something that can break. So yeah, I think draft chaff, and yeah.
Yeah, I could see a weird world where for some reason you want to block and activate an EVO as instant and get that one free value, but it just looks like too much work for the threat. That's exactly what you said, losing your equipment. So I don't think these cards will ever get sleeved for a constructed deck.
Yeah, if we had more cheap either instant speed or cheaper evos that had base on them, I could see these having a role to play, but as it stands, it's just it's a bit of a liability to be running these in your evo deck. Then the proto-based stuff. In fact, these might actually see more play in constructed than the previous ones, because you can fabricate and put them into play from your sideboard. This is a card that we're going to explore later, but overall I don't think you have much of a reason to start with these on the board. Yeah, because we have the Cogworks that are just strictly better.
The only difference between them and the Cogworks are the card you said, Fabricate, and that's if Fabricate for some reason needs to have targets in your sideboard or inventory as it stands now, you might prefer to choose them over, but it's between them or the first suite we've seen. You will play these cards, but not because they're exciting, because it's pretty much the only thing you have access to.
Yep. All right, on to the exciting stuff. EVO Still Soul Memory. There's a full set, but we are going to be taking a look at these cards one at a time. The thing that exists for all of them is that they are blue, they are 4 cost, and they block for 3. They can transform a base equipment to themselves, and when you transform from or into an EVO with a different name, you get some type of effect. In this case for Still Soul Memory, we get +1 intellect until end of turn. And they also have a bit of text that says if the EVO is a hero, this triggers twice. And as we've seen before with Singularity and the demi-hero of Teklovasen, that is how you get that effect to trigger twice. And they all have temper, so you can technically block 3 times with these, but generally speaking, you wouldn't block that third. You want to save your piece. So this is the templating for everything. What are your thoughts, Yiorgos, of the cycle?
So I mean, I don't ever see a Teklovosen deck not running 3 copies of every single one of the EVO Steel suit in his deck. I mean, there is just no way. The value is so great, plays so well with the hero ability, and pretty much that's your game plan. First of all, it's super interesting with this card that it has a block value of 3 and it's a blue, so actually the cost of putting this card in your deck is really, really low. And that already starts pretty great, and that's the same thing with the rest of the suit. And also there is a lot of value out of putting this card into your graveyard and afterwards on Teklovosen banishing it with a lot of cards that banish equipment from your graveyard. So EVO Steel Soul Memory specifically has one of the better effects, I think, because having access to extra cards is really important. For, let's say, for instance, if you transform this card earlier during the game and at some stage during your turn later you can transform out of this, you will get for your hard work an extra draw. You will get a 5th card on that turn, and that's really, really important to have access to this effect. And I think they are going to be a big part of the Teklovosen's plays. The hard part is costing 4, but in a deck full of blues you might be able to dodge that a bit.
And the chest piece itself is another one of the interesting ones. 3 resources is good. It's not quite as impactful as other stuff might be, because if you spend the resources to get this into play, unless you have an action point and a card to do something with those resources, at most you're going to be getting a gun shot. But again, a lot of these pieces are just equipment. They're not, they're your EVO suit. They're not going to be the plan just to play it and get value out of it. You get value out of filling that slot with that EVO.
Yeah, and also the EVO Steel Soul Processor really helps a lot when you try to do some bigger turns and maybe even transform 2 pieces of equipment on a single turn. These resources really smooth out if you want to set up these type of bigger turns, and that's why I think it's one of the most important equipments as well. I mean, I think it's, if not the most important, I'll probably say it's pretty high up there. And also something else that we might have missed while talking about the EVO equipment, when you defend with an EVO equipment an attack of the opponent, you can actually transform back. You can transform the equipment again after damage calculations while still on the attack, and while getting the block value after the attack transforms, you can pretty much skip the whole temper or blade break wording of a card, and that effectively gives you some free extra value, because as the Teklovosen you can actually play EVOs as instant, and that might be an important aspect of the Teklovosen's defensive kit, that you can block with this equipment a lot, transform them into a new one, and still do not lose the equipment and still get the value of blocking.
Yeah, because every time you transform with it, any -1 counters that existed before also disappear. They don't carry over. So effectively you reset that piece of gear, which at first glance is like nuts. You get 3 temper and then you change it and you get 3 more temper and it just keeps going. But if you, it's not that easy to set up. It does require 4 resources for the card itself, and if you're planning on doing that instant speed shenanigans on a block, you also need those 3 resources for Teklovosen's ability. This is at minimum 1 card and a tunic resource, but if you're playing tunic, you're not running a base in that slot, or 2 cards from hand to not 2, 3 cards from hand at instant speed to get both Teklovosen active and then have those 4 resources for the piece itself. So those instant speed stuff isn't free. That resetting of your armor piece is not as easy as originally might have made people think the hero would work, but it's obviously a great tool to have in your kit for those matchups that you can pull it off. The arms piece, I think, is probably maybe the least useful one, because you get a card back into your deck, which helps with fatiguing and stuff like that. It's a 6, so for the matchups where that's relevant, Droma is posed to rise up with with the rotation of Lexi. It's already an S tier or tier 1 hero, and you need those 6s. You have a bunch as Teklo, and this gets some back if you manage to trigger it, of course. But overall, I think it's a bit lower on the power level than other stuff.
Yeah, probably the biggest thing that, apart from what you said on fatigue, another useful thing is that when you transform when you use Singularity, it will give you a 6 power card on your next hand, which is probably the best part about this card. But we can move on, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. The Lex give you an action point. It's again useful for that Singularity turn to get multiple attacks in, but again, most of the time, I don't think you're going to have much uses for this action point. It's going to be a bit fringe, but overall, this set in general, I think is a must-run thing for Teklovasen. They're blues, block 3. They advance your game plan of having Evos, temper 3. It's just good stuff all around. The next set that we have, the Breaker set. These are some funky cards. Instant speed equipment cards. They're instant cards that have a block value, which, I mean, it's 0, but it's the first time we've seen instant cards with a block value, which is useful for scrapping them. If you scrap them, you get to play them at instant speed for free from Banish. So what do you think about this cycle?
I think I'm super excited, first of all, that this cycle exists. It's super interesting, and it gives a lot of deck building depth to a lot of heroes, both Teklovosen and Max. The first thing that comes to mind, it's so interesting that they cost 0, the way they interact with hyperdrivers, all of this stuff. In short, all of them require you to boost in order to activate their effect, and when you boost, you destroy a card underneath, so most of the time the base equipment underneath, and if you transform twice for some reason, you have 2 cards to destroy, etc. And if you use any extra hyperdrivers, you can again destroy them as well to activate the effect more. So it's looking like a deck that wants both to boost and use a few slots of EVO. I'm super excited to try them on Teklovosen. I'm really hoping that there is something there. And for the rest of the suit, I think for the reasons we have already mentioned, probably the most playable ones are the arm slots and the leg ones.
Yeah.
I think they are the most playable ones because for the reason you just mentioned before, that if you are playing a deck that's looking to maybe transform into Mechanoid, or you want to be an aggressive boost deck, the most relevant effects are of the EVO Face Breaker, because they are effectively a mini Teklo Pounder, and the boots might give you some extra action points to keep this aggressive plan going. So apart from that, arms and legs are probably the ones that we see the most play outside of Teklovosen.
Yeah, the suit overall could be a fast way to get multiple Evos into play for a Teklovosen build, or they could just be a thing to run in the arms or the legs slot for other heroes that just want to get value out of those slots that they couldn't get up to this point with the existing equipment pieces that we've had in either Goliath Gauntlet for arms or the Achilles accelerators. Facebreaker could get you a total of 3 value at face value with the Cogworks, giving you +1, and then banishing it after you transform it into the Facebreaker to get another +2, and then even more value if you can do things with the hyperdrivers that could go underneath these cards if you can manage to pull that off. But just as at rate, these cards seem to either want to get your EVO count up very quickly, or just give you some fringe extra damage. So we get to the, I think, limited stuff for the EVO package from this set. These are effectively, I don't know what we can call these as a set. It's a yellow 3 Blade Break.
Yeah, the yellow Blade Break EVOs. So these are pretty interesting. They have some interesting effects. The biggest drawback with these cards for the constructed side is that they have Blade Break. So they are pretty vulnerable, and it's pretty hard for you to actually get the value out of this in constructed. I don't think they will ever get sleeved unless very specific things happen. The only effect I feel is pretty powerful is the card you have here. That's the EVO Command Center. That reads, destroy a card under this. Your next weapon attack this turn gets when this hits, draw a card. It has the most interesting effect, I think, out of the whole suit, so that's why I think that might be the case. But even though I don't think you want that type of vulnerability into your deck, into an equipment that, first of all, is not base, so you cannot really transform out of this. And it also has blade break, so it's not easy to get the value. If you want to get the value, you will need to lose the equipment slot.
Yeah, you're gonna lose your headpiece, which so far is a bit solidified, and you would need to run a weapon that is likely to connect like Hanabi Blaster, but then you're playing an aggressive boost deck, so where does this fit into that? It's a lot of tick boxes that need to be ticked for this to draw you a card, basically. So I don't think this is worth it, and this goes for the rest of the cycle. These are obviously great for limited, but we're gonna explore this more in the limited set review. Right, these exist in the set. I am upset that these exist in the set because they don't need to exist in the set.
These cards, I think, if I'm not mistaken, these cards only exist in the cold foil slot. So we will not be drafting this. Yeah, we'll not be drafting this. I think, it's just a shout out to the professor that made the new product with LSS, and that's pretty much it. There is not really a lot to talk about. They are completely constructed and playable. Don't sleeve these cards unless you're going to play UPF. If you're going to play UPF, these cards are the best Teklovossen cards you can actually get. If not, just move on.
Yeah, like the reason I'm upset, don't get me wrong, the product is great right on the table, but the reason I was upset is because they took up 4 slots from the list, and during spoiler season, everyone was like, oh, these are gonna be AB base equipment, and then it's these ones. I'm like, no, why did they need to be reprinted here, especially since they were in that round the table product? But if you want to get your cold foils, you can find them in the set. Obviously, it's a bit rare to get your cold foil stuff, but they exist for you to pimp out your Teklovossen UPF deck. So let's move on. All right, this one is a common, but it is a lot more exciting than commons usually would have you think, because they are base. They are the only other base equipment that we have. And that means that we can do those shenanigans that we were talking about before with triggering the Steel Soul memory. So, why are we running these?
I think probably this will be the most played base EVO equipment apart from the blue majestic slot we've just seen. I think this will see the most played Teklovossen. I don't think anybody else can actually run these, only Teklovossen, but on Teklovossen these cards are probably going to be staples. I don't think at least a few copies of these cards in the sideboard, maybe for specific matchups, if not in the main deck. There is no way Teklovossen will leave his house without having a few copies of these cards sleeved. And the reason is exactly what you said. They are great in the early game because you can do all these shenanigans with blocking and transforming instantly, and because these cost 2, the restriction on the opponent's turn is way less. You can actually block, pitch 2 blues, you transform into that, you get the free value of blocking with an equipment and transforming it back, removing the -1 counters, maybe triggering an effect, cycling your card. I mean, the value is just there. And also it plays great into Teklovossen's game plan that at the moment feels like is a deck that wants to drag the game out in order to get his full suit of EVOs and start overpowering the opponent, and all they offer is block, and block is exactly what you need in this deck.
Yep. We haven't talked about what they do yet, but it's a 2 battle worn, which is great because they don't break. You can block with these to your heart's content and then transform out of them. As a card in your hand, it's not great because as a Mechanologist, you're not used to 2 blocks. But again, these work with that plan of dragging the game out, having more value out of your equipment pieces, and with those Steel Soul memory, if you can get those triggers off, that's a massive boost in power for those turns, allowing you to keep progressing that game further to the later stages where you have all your toys ready to go. Now we get to the cycle of yellow commons for most of the time, I think, limited. I have seen some people try to run data mine in -IO due to the fact that you can do this effect of drawing a card, putting something back on top that you would then put into play. But again, this means that you need to run some type of base in the head slot in a hero that already has a low health. I don't think these are good for constructed. The fringe uses maybe exist, but for now, it's nearly an F for constructed, just nearly there. Same with the rest of it.
I didn't see any reason to use that. Again, the only basic equipment we should actually check out if the value is not great should always be the arms and the legs. And if the arms and the legs are not good enough, we don't really care. They don't feel like playable. They are just, blade break, which is not great. I could see the EVO Cogspeeder, the arm slot again, for all the reasons we just said, might see some use, but you do a bit too much work for not too much of a payoff. There is some interaction with EVO Cogspeeder and Dash. It's good to have in the deck, but that's the only exception. I think the rest of the suit is pretty unplayable.
Alright, with this, we wrap up the equipment and we get into some attacks. These are our payoffs for the EVO suit. I don't know what we're going to call these, the Gundam cycle. I don't know. They follow a same pattern of 6 cost reds with 6 attack and 3 block. It should have been 6 block just to round out the numbers, but I think that would have been a bit too good. That have the same templating of if you have one EVO equipped, they get an on hit. Some are better than others. We're going to take a look. And then the other 3 modes are the same. The 2 EVOs make these cost 3 less, so they're a 3 cost card. The 3 more EVOs, you get overpower, so that on hit becomes more likely to hit. And with 4 EVOs, this becomes insane and is a 3 cost 9 attack with overpower and an on hit, and you lose the game. Almost. Why are these so insane?
I mean, honestly, first of all, it plays great into Teklovosen's game plan. I don't think we will ever see these cards outside of Teklovosen. I don't think we will ever see an EVO Matters deck outside of Teklovosen. So that's the only reason you might rate this card lower, that we probably will never see them in other Mechanologists. But on Teklovosen, these cards are insane. Even Annihilator Engine has probably the weakest of the hit effects. It has the most fringe hit effect, but still the stat line is just so immense that even then it will still see some play. Terminator Tank and War Machine, I don't ever see any Teklovosen deck not running 3 copies of each in his main deck into any single matchup. It's literally creeping crush. I think these cards will never leave the 60 cards of a Teklovosen deck.
It's a 2-card crippling crush at that. It's not
2-card crippling crush.
Yeah.
At that point.
So yeah, I also agree that we're going to see these everywhere. The thing that concerns me, and that rating for Annihilator Engine is a bit lower, is due to the fact that you can only run so many cards in your deck, and these are reds. So having 9 reds in your deck is fine. Obviously, we've seen that with Bravo, but I think some stuff might need to be adjusted in your red slot, and you would start with Annihilator Engine over the rest. That's why I have a little bit of a lower rating there. And with Terminator Tank, obviously that on hit is always going to be good, whereas the Destroy an Arsenal might not come up, but the stats themselves are just insane across the board. Another cycle, the Protocol cycle with 3 cards in 3 different pitch colors. This is pure stats most of the time. It's a 3 for 7 that blocks 3, but in a mech mirror, the effect could come up, and in a format that I believe a lot of people are going to be trying out mechs, this could be worth a couple of slots in our decks.
I think this card is purely a sideboard card. I don't think you should ever use this card in your main deck. I mean, exactly as you said before, it's a 3/7 red that blocks for 3, but on the Klovosen, the red slot are so heavily contested that I don't think you can afford to put in your deck a 3/7 block 3 card. I mean, even Enlightened Strike has to be better than this in order to draw a card or, cycle something else. So I think this is a sideboard card for Teklovosen, the end.
Alright, let's go to the more exciting stuff from this cycle. Pulse Wave Protocol. This one, you get to look at the opponent's hand, to reveal cards from their hand equal to the number of EVOs you have equipped, and then you get to choose one of them that has less defense than you have EVOs equipped and force them to block with it. Of note, this isn't quite Pulse Wave Harpoon. Pulse Wave would require a 3 to steal a 3 block. With this card, you would need all 4 EVOs to get a 3 block because the defense value needs to be lower than the number of EVOs you have. So if you have 3, you can only get 2 block stuff from your opponent. I'm knocking it down a little bit for this because this makes it a 3/6 for most of the game until your late game, and then this is also a yellow that messes up a little bit with your cost curve with putting your EVOs down and stuff like that. But it's obviously such an impactful effect, especially maybe against some aggro heroes that have 2 blocks in there.
Yeah, I think Pulse Wave Harpoon is it's a yellow, so it's way easier to include in your deck rather than a red card. I mean, the reds are way more contested. That's not the case with yellows, even though yellows do not fit perfectly your curve, but still it's great. And the thing I love about Pulse Wave Harpoon is that the fact that this card exists is it will lock games out if you've casted Singularity. I mean, I know it's silly to put oil in the fire, okay? But if you cast Singularity and on your next hand you're getting a Pulse Wave Protocol, you might force the opponent to lose 2 turns in a row. And that means that no matter the life difference you have, making Singularity even more better to locking the game out of the opponent the moment you get that card is great on a yellow 3-block 6-power card.
Yep. It is almost surely going to be a 3-of in every Teklovosen deck until the end of time. It is in a sideboard card like the previous protocol, and for similar reasons, Magnetic Protocol will also probably we're going to see that in every Teklovosen deck forever. Sadly, it's not a 6-power one, it's not a popper, but it is a blue 3-block, and at least right now, we don't have too many ways to put -1 counters on our opponent's things that have Blade Break, so we can then pull them with this. But if there's some temper stuff, we can really mess with and get our opponent's valuable equipment.
Yeah, it's a 3/5 3-block blue that might sometimes get popped in second cycle, where you will have every single of your EVOs, so it's coming for full effect, and because it's so late in the game, the opponent might have used some equipment to block some hit effects of your big war machines, and now Magnetic Protocol might come to, completely destroy some equipment. It's a great card. I also think that it's way easier to include the blue 3-block 5-power card in your deck than other stuff, so that's why I think it will also be sleeved for the rest of time in Teklovosen decks.
Yep. Alright, he's a blue card that I don't think we're going to see sleeved in any decks. It's a bit disappointing. It's a new card type. First of all, we have blocks. Before this set came out, everybody was begging for that Mechanologist defense reaction to finally not have to worry about boosting a sink below and then ending your turn. And we didn't quite get that. We did not get the Mechanologist defense reaction. We got block cards. Block cards serve 2 functions. You can pitch them and you can defend with them in the defense step, not as reactions. So do you get anything out of it? first cycle, you're going to be pitching this for blue, not doing anything else with this. So this makes it good in pitching and then bad at everything else. You can't really block with it early game because it blocks for 1. And the payoff is maybe in the late game you get to block for up to 5, which is great to block for 5 with blue, but what are you doing with this card if you draw it early? It's just, and you can't pitch it, you don't have anything to do with it. Why do you have this in your deck? Is there any reason to have this in your deck?
I mean, it's a blue card, so it's way easier to include in your deck, and Teklovosan, the more we've seen it, has a few cards that don't block for 3, sorry. So maybe you can include that, because at some point it might be a, you know, 0 cost block 4, that's when it gets its value, but I also wouldn't start with this card. It's a playable card, you can see it in some decks. If you have the time to set up and you want some extra block, and maybe, you know, stop some hit points, some breaking points which is relevant, this card might see some more play. But I don't think this card will ever be sleeved more than 2 times, or maybe 1. I don't think you want to see many copies of this card, especially in the earlier stage of the game, so that's why it's quite weak.
Alright, now we get to our more cycles. Heavy Artillery. These are fine payoffs, but just the power level isn't here, I think, for Constructed. There are 2 card 6s that have some kind of evasion, but when you have those Gundam stuff, do you really want to be running 2 card 6s? You could, in Teklovosan, you're not boosting, so you could even run CNC in this slot. Why would you run this?
The only argument I think is with Heavy Artillery Red is that it's one of the better cards to end the game if you are afraid for fatiguing at some point, because if you have the 4 EVOs equipped, it's pretty much unblockable into some decks, but that's not even the case because a lot of decks run non-attacks. So in decks like Dromai, for instance, Dromai can just block because dragons are not attack actions, so they don't really care about the text. So maybe then the blue slot is slightly a consideration, but again, I think there are some better options on that slot, and it's close. Yellow is completely unplayable. It's close, but I think there are some better options in that card.
Yeah, overall, great cards for limited, but in Constructed, I think you have ultimately better options, both in your red and your blue slot, and yes, I agree, the yellow, there's really no point in running that card. Liquid Cool Mayhem. I like these cards a bit more, especially the blue one, because it is a card that you would definitely like to see early game. It blocks 3, pitches for blue, that's fine. And in the early game, it's a 0 for 4 once you have all your stuff equipped. And 1 card 4s, that's a blue, I think it's fine to have as a blue. You're not excited to, oh, I drew a Liquid Cool Mayhem, great. No, but I think it has a role to play as a blue.
Yeah, the yellow is completely unplayable, obviously. The red one, again, I think there are way better options, so the only real contender is blue Liquid Cool Mayhem, but I can see a lot of worlds where, yeah, you want to keep pushing damage, so you want to keep your 0 cost for 4. Also helps with Dromai because you don't have 4 power a lot, and 0 cost 4 to kill a dragon sometimes might be quite relevant. So I could totally see Liquid Cool Mayhem Blue being played, none of the rest.
Mechanical Strength. If you want numbers, you get them from this cycle, but again, if you want numbers, you have the Gundam set. At best, the red one can be a 2 card 9, which is exactly the stats of the Gundam set. So if you want more of this effect, I don't know why you would, you can run them. Maybe the blue, because again, late game, this is a blue that blocks 3 that is a 2 card 7. So that's not terrible, 2 card 7 off of a blue could be fine. But other than that, I don't think you're going to be running these.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. The yellow will never get sleeved, the red maybe for some reason you want a bigger Teklovosan deck. I don't know why you want a bigger deck with Teklovosan. And the blue will be a decent contender as playable because it's, it's one of the better options to have in your deck if you want stats rather than a scrap card or something.
Grinding Gears is it's a zero-cost blue item, and this goes for every item that we've seen ever. They don't block, so you're either going to pitch them or you're going to play them. Most of these will have Crank. Crank basically lets you, once these enter play, you can remove a Steam counter from them to gain an action point. Grinding Gears enters with 1 Steam counter, and at the beginning of your turn, you have to remove a Steam counter, and if there isn't one to remove, this gets destroyed. The action on this is for basically 0 resources, but as an action, so you don't have you lose your action point. Basically, you destroy the top card of your opponent's deck. This is a mill deck, but do we have tools to put together a mill deck or a fatigue deck that will use this? I don't think so.
I mean, we've seen a lot of other cards in other classes that interact with the top card of the opponent's deck and, might destroy or banish or etc. And it's never there. I can see that might be some potential for the future. At some point during the future, there might be a hero that in their own turn sets up the top card of their next turn and you want some interaction with that for some reason. But as it stands now, I literally see no reason to include a no block blue item card that effectively does nothing when it hits the board.
Yeah.
So I'm giving this card an F, but I could totally see that change if at the future something changes.
Yeah, I'm not quite at an F because I think this is more of something that could be figured out in maybe like a high octane type of turn system reset. You get a bunch of action points and you mill a whole bunch of cards. Like maybe there's a deck that exists, but at that point I do think that's just why are you doing this over literally anything else? But it may be possible.
You had me on combo stuff. I'll give this card a D-. Okay.
Okay. All right, Prismatic Lens. I think this is a lot better. This has some good potential. It's there's some builds that allow you to infinitely loop cards off of a 2-card hand in Dash specifically with this card. The setup this requires is a bit intensive because you need this in play. You need a blue protocol item and 2 other blues in hand to make this work, but you can infinitely loop effectively 2 cards for 6 damage a turn spread over 2 things. It's an interesting thing to have available, but it's very fragile because if you lose any of your pieces, you don't do anything anymore and you just lose the game. But I think this has a lot of potential because it's an instant as well. So if Dash has that way of playing both in your turn and the opponent's turn some stuff, then this can get a lot of value, I think. And it's definitely a card that can do some stuff.
It's a card that feels like a combo of some point, or if we get a card that actually makes the effect matter. But the way Flesh and Blood is at the moment, where every single point of life matter and every single resource you use matters a lot, I don't see for it to be easy to actually play a 1-cost yellow that interacts with the top card of your deck, and that's it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't figured out a great way to actually get some obvious value out of Prismatic Lens so far.
Quantum Processor, another yellow majestic item that I think this falls into a more playable category for that Dash than what we've seen so far, because it plays into her plan. You will have items in your deck. You're gonna draw some of them. It feels terrible to have items in your hand as Dash. So this gets around that and lets you stack some counters on your weapon and get some extra action points. I think this is very interesting, and the fact that it's instant as well, because you can get some defensive stuff maybe in your opponent's turn. So I think there's a lot here, and it's free. Obviously, it's free to activate. So I think somebody will definitely figure out how to make use of this in a dash deck in Constructed.
Quantum Processor is probably one of my favorite cards out of that type of thing. First of all, the value is there. I mean, you play that, let's say you do not crank, and you instantly use the instant to put an item from your hand. It goes to the opponent's turn, you use the instant to put an item into your hand, it goes back to your turn, you use the instant to put an item into your... Effectively, you could put into play 4 items of a single Quantum Processor. I mean, there is no way that's not great. I mean, come on, there is no way. The ceiling is really high for this card to actually work. And I think this, and we've seen a lot of these cards this set. It's a card that feels it will get better the more items get printed. I mean, every time from now, since the end of time with Flesh and Blood, whenever a new Mechanologist item gets printed, we need to go back and look the interactions between Quantum Processor and the new item that got printed. So I think this card is great. It might not be there yet because there is not a lot of decks that will want to play this card, but honestly, this card is almost a consideration for max. Playing a Hyperdriver at instant speed at your turn, crank it, get an action point, attack again. I mean, the value is there, and I think this card is great, but we don't really have a deck, so I'll give this card a B.
Stasis Cell. This does not have crank or steam counters. We don't have many of those items in this set, but this comes into play at 0 cost, and when it enters or leaves the arena, the activated abilities of target equipment can't be activated until the end of its controller's next turn. There are some stuff where this is important. Obviously, all the mech base stuff has activated abilities. Techno Foundry Heart has one, but for the metagame at large, we can stop Fiendl's Spring Tunic from getting a counter out of this. This isn't the biggest thing this can do. I think the biggest thing it can do is with the second ability, with that you can put this on the bottom of your deck, and an equipment cannot defend this turn, and you get go again. You don't lose your turn completely out of doing this. This would have been crazy in the Oldhim meta because you just completely shut down Rampart of the Ram's Head. They cannot block with it, and if you're on Pistol Plan, they're just dead. But right now, this is quite fringe, I think, and it's mostly going to be a sideboard card for those matchups that have a bunch of equipment that you care about.
I think this card is really interesting. First of all, exactly what you said about Rampart's Head. I mean, if this card existed in the old high meta, honestly, maybe the old high meta could not exist. Maybe. I mean, this card completely sets down cards like Rampart's Head. So, something really interesting to note though with this card is that the first part of the effect, that abilities of target equipment can't be activated, works not only when you play it, but when it leaves the arena and is not required by the second effect. So you could use Galvanize, a new keyword we have that wants you to destroy an item that gets +2 in block, and actually activate the Stasis Cell. And for instance, there is a Fi attacking you, he attacks you with a Snatch, and you can block, activate Galvanize, and before you get into the reaction step, you can negate their Snapdragon Scalers. It's still fringe, it's not a great, but there are many minor interactions that exist with this card, and I think the more the metagame grows, it's a powerful effect. It's something that, you know, the Mechanologist heroes that care about having items on board and use the Galvanized keyword should always pay attention to this card. Stasis Cell at the moment is the best material to use for Galvanize. And if you have an instant speed way of putting this card, you might do, you know, some blow of turns, let's say with the card we've just seen that puts items at instant speed during your turn, etc. So I think Stasis Cell is a great card, yeah.
TikTok Clock is mostly a sideboard card for that mech mirror. You get to destroy some of your opponent's stuff and get some free value, free damage out of it. You can even close out some games with this. yeah, I don't see this running anywhere else but a sideboard, so yeah.
And it's slightly better in dust because you can bring it in and, at instant speed, which is quite relevant, but yeah, mostly it's a sideboard card.
Now onto the lower rarity items. Fuel Injector. This is a cycle of blues that cost 0 and have an activated ability. This is an instant that you get to put on the bottom, get a resource. This can be pretty good in Dash to play some items in your opponent's turn, because you can play this in your opponent's, put it in the bottom, and then put a card. Helps with fatigue as well because it goes in the bottom. Yeah, I could see play maybe as a one-of in Dash, I think. Other than that,
it feels like a decent filler card at the Dash deck. I don't see any other deck ever running this card, but the new Dash ever. But on Dash, it could be a decent filler in blues if you are looking for more items to activate your hero power more, if that's what you're looking for.
Yep. Medkit is super interesting because it's like the anti-fatigue card to rule them all. It's sad that it's not an instant, but if it was an instant, it would be crazy. Because you get to put this on the bottom, it's a blue, and you get 2 life. It's old Tim's wet dream to just keep recycling this over and over and over again. But ultimately, this is 2 action points for 2 life without the loss of a card. I'm not too sure about this, especially since the activation.
Again, I think this whole new Mechanologist blue items, it's just, you know, new Dusk toys. That's it. If for some reason there is an interaction where you want to sometimes spend your action and gain 2 health because it's relevant in a matchup, you might include this card in your Dusk deck. The value is not great though, and I think there are some more competitive options, but you need some fillers, and that's the slot. So I think there's another C card, you know, a filler on the new Dust deck, and that's it.
Steam Canister, similar to the previous stuff. I think this is a bit more fringe because it's only items with Crank that can put that Steam counter on. I'm not quite sure where we could see this. There are some, putting a Steam counter on your items can have value if you get stuff for them sticking in play, like the yellows that we've seen before with Prismatic Lens and Quantum Processor. But other than that, I think this has not very obvious uses even in Dash.
I think if for some reason you're running Dash and you're running a lot of items that you want to stay on board, you might include this as your filler blue in a new Dash deck. Apart from the new Dash deck and on that very specific scenario, I don't think you could ever want to sleeve Steam Canister in a constructed deck.
The first script cycle, we have a rare and a common one. Effectively, these are all 1-cost Crank items that come into play with a single Steam counter. Again, beginning of your turn, remove it or destroy it. And they have a static effect. So the red one allows your makes the action cards from your opponent have -1 defense while they're defending your stuff. So it's situational +1, basically. The penetration script is your Mechanologist attack action cards, have +1. So this is a guaranteed +1 on all your cards. And then the blue one gives all your Mechanologist attacks a +1 defense. Overall, as a cycle, I think the blue one is the most interesting one, and perhaps the yellow, if you can get that type of deck that boosts a lot, but then again, getting more than 4 value out of it is going to be very tricky. So the blue one, I think, is the most interesting out of all of them because it's the easiest one to prevent maybe some on-hits and just the extra value from your opponent's attacks, and it's a blue.
If for some reason you're playing an aggressive deck that attacks a lot, and for some reason you can also generate some Steam counters to make these scripts stay a bit more in the play while being an aggressive deck, I could see a universe where red and yellow are decent, are playable. But at first glance, I think Security Script is one of the better ones because it's just so easier to get the value, because I don't think that the new Dash is that type of deck.
Backup protocols, we have red, yellow, and blue. These feel a lot like combo type of cards. This is a great point with these is with the blue one specifically, and Dash's specialization with Spark of Genius. You can play Exical 0 after boosting, get a backup protocol blue into play, draw a card off of your Spark, and then crank this, getting back your action point, pitching a blue to activate, getting a blue back in hand. So you net a resource, the item into play, so that's a counter on your pistol, and you draw a card to keep going. So maybe it has some uses there. I don't think the rest have much of a reason to be played. So I get it's more of a role player in some type of mini combo in a dash deck, I think.
Yeah, I don't see also red and yellow ever being sleeved unless a very specific combo deck requires them to exist. But blue, I think it's probably one of the better fillers for the new dash, for the reason you said. And let's say you find it off the top, you trigger Quank, you get an action point, you can shoot the pistol, and then you pitch a blue with the remaining 2 resources you have to get a new blue in your hand. So effectively, you sought a pistol for free for a card just by existing in your deck, which is pretty good value.
Boom grenades. I think this is the highest value out of most of the cards you're going to get for Dash IO. That red one giving you an on hit of free 4 damage. If you play this off the top of the deck, you know, basically 1 resource, whatever. You play pay a resource to get +4 any on hit is just crazy good. The good thing is that if something would go through and then your instant speed putting this into play before damage, the opponent and 1 damage is leaking through your attack, what's the opponent going to do? Play a defense reaction, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to keep my grenade for next turn if you're not going to crank it, which would be an interesting timing wise to see how you would get that to work, because if you do crank it to get that action point back, then obviously the grenade would be gone come your next turn. But I think the value is crazy for red. Maybe yellow, because again 3 damage is 3 damage, and if it's free off the top, maybe. But I think the red has a space in aggressive Dash IO decks.
I could also see Boom Grenade being played, and it's probably one of the better payoffs of a card existing. And not only, even if the opponent responds, the great thing about Boom Grenade is that, exactly as you said, it can survive a single turn on board. And that's pretty relevant. And also, when it's destroyed, it triggers some effects you might have that require you to have a lost item this turn. But yeah, I mean, Boom Grenade is pretty great in Dash, nothing else.
Dissolving Shield, again, I think red is the only one that could see any play because it's a 0 cost item that is defensive. You can get into play for your item synergies, and this even sticks into play for multiple turns should there be a need for that to be the case, and helps with on hits a lot. You can get that tick point of block value out of your opponent, or even maybe some Kodachis, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Dissolving Shield red is great because you can put it into your turn with 1 resource, let's say off the top of your deck. You load your pistol at the opponent turn. It's instances of 1, so it really helps you smooth out, stop some breaking points and stuff. And because it's instances of 1, you can, in theory, prevent 2 damage out of that, and then even use it to galvanize and get the extra effect of galvanize and get that super value. I mean, the red Dissolving Shield is bread and butter for the new Dash deck. Yeah. The rest of the yellow and the blue ones, the blue one maybe, but I don't think so. I don't think it's worth the time and the effort to put these cards into play apart from the red.
Hadron Collider is, I think, effectively a worse Boom Grenade because it costs 1. It kind of sticks into play, but it buffs up an attack. It's face up if it's going to do this, especially if you're going to play it in your turn and then pass a turn. It loses a steam counter. It's only a +3. I'm not a fan of this card in general for Constructed, and I think we should move on.
It's a draft card, and the main reason is because it loses value if it wants to stay on board. Yeah, so let's move on.
All right, the common scripts. they're the same as the rare ones in that they come into play with a steam counter and they have crank, and at the beginning of your turn you would get rid of a counter or the item itself, and they have a static effect. These all cost 0. The red one gives all your Mechanologist attack action cards overpower, so some evasion there. Overpower isn't particularly relevant, I think, for Max because you don't have that many on hits. Perhaps might be relevant in Dash because you get those boom grenades maybe, but overall it's kind of shaky. Megahertz script gives all your attacks go again. I think this is fringe relevant because you don't have to boost stuff off the top of your deck, helping with fatigue issues, and also letting items stay on top of your deck so you can play them with Dash.
Yeah, we're probably looking here at a suit again that's only playable in Dash, the new Dash, and I don't think it has a lot of effects to care about the overload, the megahertz. It might have some uses to give go again if you're not running a lot of boost cards, and the autosave script if you are looking for a critical mass of blue crank items maybe, but I think there are better options.
Hyperdriver, it's a reprint. It's going to be played in all Max decks forever, and if you're doing stuff with Hyper X3 that we talked about before, you're going to be running Hyperdrivers. There are some Hyperdriver payoffs that might be run in some decks perhaps, but again, it's a reprint, great card. Hyper Scrapper is, I think you would run this in any deck that is running any amount of Hyperdrivers. It's a blue block 3 that can get some pretty good value in the late game. I don't think there's much of a reason not to run this in a Max deck, but yeah, it's solid.
I think Hyperdriver also is pretty interesting. It's interesting that it's blue, so you will pitch it at the beginning of the game and get it on second cycle, and on second cycle you will get to do a pretty powerful turn of only blues almost, and that's pretty relevant. Also, it's a silly way to give you resources to activate Nitro Mechanoid if for some reason the game is that long and you still haven't played Nitro Mechanoid. I think this card will see a lot of plays in the aggressive boost Maxwell decks that run Hyperdrivers.
Scrap Trader. This is going to perhaps be a staple in Teklovasen. It fuels that banish zone and it does everything you want it to do. Gives you resources to play your stuff and also gets it into the banish zone, effectively kind of drawing you cards. So yeah, I think this is going to be great in Teklovasen and just probably not played anywhere else. But there's a lot of S's here, so why is this a million S?
Yeah, I mean this card is Codex for Teklovasen. If you pull out the numbers, this is Codex of Failure for Teklovasen. It's a single card that gives off 10 value. It's insane. So this card, first of all, the fact that it gives you exactly 4 resources, which is the cost of the blue suit, is insane because of a single Scrap Trader and a random blue in your hand. You can play Scrap Trader, banish 2 of the EVO equipment from your graveyard, yet you got 3 block already, and choose which one you want to transform while drawing a new card and putting a card in arsenal. I mean, it's insane, and you already have another EVO in your banish zone waiting for you to pull that off. I don't ever see a Teklovasen deck of any kind not running 3 copies of that card.
Wow. Okay, I'm a little lower on it because of that. The only thing you can do with it, I think, is to play it. I don't think the red is relevant as a pitch, and I don't think the block value is anything you want to be doing with a card. So you would always want to just arsenal it and just wait for it to be the time to use it. And I guess since it's a 0 cost, this line of play is fine. I don't know. I need to see this in play. I'll trust you on this one. It's an S. I'll keep it a bit lower because of this, the fact that it isn't flexible. But I hope that I am wrong and we have a Codex power level card in Mex.
And also, I want to note something about Scrap Trader since we have the time on that. It's that it's really interesting to the way that LSS feels like they design cards nowadays, that there are these majestic cards on very specific scenarios, on very specific situations, on very specific heroes that go way beyond what you would expect of a single card. And I really like if LSS takes that design a step further into constructed sets in the future.
Especially since this card isn't like just big numbers from an attack. It's more nuanced than just here's a million attack on a card.
Yeah.
Right, on to the scrap cards. So this is how Teklovasen gets his +1 intellect for a lot of the game, is with cards that let you scrap or banish cards from your graveyard that can be items or equipment, so your EVOs or some items. The fact that you can banish items is kind of neither here nor there, I think, for most builds. Maybe some Dash stuff cares about this, but overall I think the keyword itself is going to be most relevant for Teklovasen.
I think, yeah, scrap is a really important keyword for Teklovasen, but specifically hydraulic press is probably one of the weakest one, because overpowered is not really relevant, because what we're looking out of this card is to actually scrap cards. And the effect, you don't really care about having evasion or dealing damage with Teklovasen, so I don't think why you would ever choose to play this card. So I think there are better options. It's not a bad card, but we just have better options in constructed.
Yeah, for sure. Ratchet Up is our first instance of Galvanize, which lets you destroy an item you control while a card with Galvanize is defending to give that card +2 defense. All of the cards with Galvanize have a base block value of 2, so the ability would bring them up to 4. But let's take a look at the rest of Ratchet Up. Is that if you have an item be destroyed this turn, the action cards get -1 defense while defending this turn. So obviously you want to be using this card either offensively to give your opponents that -1 while they're defending, or you can use this defensively yourself by destroying some of your own items to make this a sink below of sorts.
I think the red Ratchet Up specifically has to be pretty decent bread and butter for Dash. I mean, it's pretty easy to trigger that on Dash pretty naturally. If you have a crank item that lost its counter and now it's getting destroyed, you already got the value from the card, and now the Ratchet Up has its effect active while attacking, and with the 2 remaining resources you can threaten any item of the top of your deck. You can pitch a blue attack with Ratchet Up, having the -1, and threaten any item of the top of the deck, so the opponent, if he wants to block, it has an assassin feel where I might overblock here and the opponent might just do nothing, or I might choose not to block and I get a bomb off the top of the deck and I deal you 9 damage of my 2-card hand, which is really great. But again, it's a filler at best. Yellow and blue, I don't think they will ever see play.
No. Scrap Hopper, a bit more interesting. We can use that quicken token in mostly Teklovasen to get 2 of those big 3-cost attacks through, and also helps facilitate this plan of banishing stuff from the graveyard to be played at a cheap rate as a 0. And I think the blue one is the one that we can expect to see the most of.
Yeah, the blue one is a blue 3-block that when played might give you 4 value. It checks every box, so it's pretty great. And the quicken is also pretty relevant because Teklovasen doesn't have a lot of ways of getting action points apart from when transforming into the omnipotent thingy.
Soup Up, it's another payoff for Dash most of the time. Maybe Max can do this with his hyperdrivers being destroyed, but I think that's a bit fringe. So if this works, it's kind of a zipper, a 0 to 60 that you don't have to lose a card out of deck for, and you can have that upside of defending for 4. So for red, I think this can see some play in a Dash deck perhaps, but other than that, it's a bit shaky, I think. It requires a bit too many things to work for this to work, so yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The red is fringely playable, the rest not so much. Let's move on.
Torque tuned. We have a lot of cards that gain overpower. I don't particularly like overpower all that much as an evasive keyword. I don't expect to see this card playing anywhere. The fact that the red one's a 6 kind of matters, but
it's a draft card. I mean, it has some fringe uses. I don't think it will ever get sleeved. None of these cards.
Yeah. More block stuff. Maybe the red one because it blocks for 5, but the rest I don't see much of a reason to run them. The blue literally blocks as any card should block for. The yellow is a yellow, so automatically it doesn't matter. And the red one blocks for 5, which is interesting. So I think it deserves to be looked at. One card block 5 is nothing to scoff at. So maybe,
but at that point I don't know why you would want to put Cognition Field in your deck and not something like Fate for Sync or Sync Below. But maybe you want to have a pure Mechanologist deck because you're boosting. So I wouldn't love it, but I can see wanting to have something defensive on a Mechanologist deck and be forced to run Cognition Field in a Dust deck. Not super excited about it though.
Alright, the alloy cards, I don't think we're going to see these anywhere. 0 for 4, defense for 2, maybe 4. It's kind of whatever. I don't think we're going to see these cards. You don't go again out of them, so moving on. Infused Titanium, I think the red one is a bit interesting as a 2-card 7. We've seen that be a thing that some classes have success with. So I wouldn't discount it altogether. But other than that, is there anything else to care about this card?
It's not insanely bad to have a 3 for 7 that sometimes blocks for 4, but I think there are better options. And the more that Flesh and Blood evolves, I think you have way better options rather than to put Infused Titanium. If for some reason you want to attack for 7 and to know that you can block off a single card for 4, okay, maybe, but it wouldn't be my first consideration. Yellow and blue, no way they ever get sleeved.
Junkyard Dog. Now, this one I think is a lot more interesting than a lot of the other ones. As a 2-card 7 for the red one that also draws a card in Teklovasan, this is a lot more interesting. 2-card, 7 attack, draw a card, blocks for 3. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about it. And same can be said about the blue one, which is good early cycle, good late. It's I think one of the, especially the blue one that we're going to see in a lot of Teklovasan resource bases.
Yeah, I mean, Junkyard Dog Blue is one of the better blue cards you can run in Teklovasan because effectively you could do a 3 for 7. But even the red Junkyard Dog, if you are in a deck that wants to have a lot of scrap and you want a critical mass of scrap while also maintaining the tempo, because there are some matchups where your game plan is to actually kill the opponent, not wait to go to that ultra late game and actually transform into, do the singularity thing. 3 for 7 that draws a card, hook me in. I mean, the value is super great. I think Junkyard Dog is probably one of the better scrap cards out there.
Scrap Compactor. This basically lets you become Teklovasan for the turn that you play it. I don't think you would be playing this if you're not Teklovasan, and if you are Teklovasan, I think you would be playing something else. So I'm personally not a big fan of any of these cards for any deck.
There are some interactions where with Scrap Compactor you can do a 2-card play and instantly scrap because you get it for free as an instant. But probably as well, I don't think it's the first. I think there are better considerations that we will see later. But maybe you want all your blues to be 0 cost because you want the deck to be super fast. So then maybe you put Scrap Compactor, okay. But it's a filler Teklovasan card.
Scrap Harvester, this is a card that is interesting because it can keep some items into play. This is the card that I was referencing with Prismatic Lens before, with the blue Scrap Harvester and the blue Protocol item. You can assemble some loops and keep items into play, but it's a bit too convoluted to, I think, consistently be able to pull off. But the fact that you can keep some items into play is certainly something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, the effect is pretty relevant. I don't think this is a Teklovosen card though, so it's not a Teklovosen card. It might be used in either Max or, you know, Dash. Good filler. I don't think you'll see much play though, apart there is a very specific reason to actually want a crank. A steam counter and a crank card.
Scrap Prospector. I think this is actually quite interesting for Teklovosen. Getting that resource is critically the fourth resource for your Steel Soul Memory items, EVOs I mean. So I think actually this might be sort of the best in slot for this type of effect. A card that you're going to banish that EVO from your graveyard, gives you that resource, then you pitch another blue to play that 4 cost out of your banish. Obviously you also need to activate your Teklovosen or have an action point in some capacity to do this, but critically you don't need that additional card on top to do all of this together. So I think the blue one has some good potential, the other ones.
Yeah, Scrap Processor is probably the best 0 cost, 1 attack, 3 block scrap card out there for all the reasons you mentioned. Great card. If you want to play Teklovosen, get at least red and yellow blue copies of this card, red and blues.
Heist, we're getting to the boost stuff. Heist I think is a 3-off in any deck that wants to boost forever. It's the value that you can get for this hitting, it's the first time we have an actual relevant on-hit effect for any type of Mechanologist deck. Even Original Dash I don't think would have a reason not to run Heist. It's just, I think, an incredible card for mechs.
The problem with Heist is that it's weird on its curve, because if you are a deck that wants to run the maximum velocities and, you know, the harpoon type of cards, you do not really can run a lot of 2-cost cards. So you actually need to care a bit for the haste effect to matter. So if you're a bit of a heavier boost deck, you might include Heist either way, but I think most of the time this card will be either a sideboard card, because if you can hit stuff of the opponent, this card is insane. I mean, the value of this card, if you can actually hit cards of the opponent's banish zone, it's just off the charts. If it's only on your banish zone, you need to have very specific reasons to actually run this card, because remember with Max, for instance, if you're running the headpiece that when hyperdrivers get boosted, they go under the headpiece, so they are no longer in your banish zone for you to get out of Heist. So you can only actually get your own hyperdrivers as Max only if they have been banished through your Teklo Foundry Heart, not through boosting. And that's a really big difference. If that wasn't the case and all of the hyperdrivers you're running in your deck can actually get there with boosting, then I would probably consider running Heist. So it's either a sideboard card or it really depends on the build you're doing.
Reprint with maximum velocity. It's good that this is reprinted because I think a lot of people will need access to it. I think this has become better because we have ways to enable it much easier that we're going to take a look at in a little bit. But yeah, maximum velocity, great payoff for boosting, and gets a reprint. Moonshot is interesting. Yellow, not great, but for 4 resources you can attack for 9 with this, so you don't get the overpower and 2 items out of 2 hyperdrivers from the board. I think it's a purely a max card, and even then I think you can be doing better stuff with your hyperdrivers. You're getting rid of them so you can't mechanoid them, so I'm not too happy with this card overall. But I think it makes a cut.
It's we obviously only talk about Max. This card is only playable in Max. I don't think it's ever playable in something else. So in Max, you're playing a card that doesn't have boost, is a yellow, is not even a blue, or has great stats being a red, and requires you to sacrifice at least 1 or 2 hyperdrivers from the board to actually get value. It's a decent finisher, but most of the time you could be doing better stuff with your Moonshot, and it has a lot of ifs for it to work. So even though it might see some play because it has a relevant effect, I think it will be one of those cards that will get tested at the beginning on the first early draft max decks, and afterwards just get cut and never see the light of day until something changes on the way max is built.
Steel Street Hoons has a lot of text on it, but overall it's a blue that could attack for 5 in the late game perhaps, and defense for a bit extra. I can see this seeing some play as a filler blue.
I think this is a pretty great filler blue in the Dust deck for all the reasons we said about the other cranked card. It's pretty natural to get an item destroyed at the beginning of your turn as Dust because all of your crank items might get destroyed naturally. So this is a 3/4/5 blue boost card, which is way above the charts, and also has Galvanize for the same defensive reason. So it's a decent value blue Dust card if you want to be triggering Galvanize. If you never want to trigger Galvanize, you probably will not run this card.
This one, I think, is a lot more exciting. This does a lot of things very well, and I've started every single card so far. So, Yiorgos, why is this doing things for decks?
Twin Drive is a 2/4/5 that lets you boost and lets you boost again. So, it's important to note here that boost actually gives the card go again, so actually boosting twice does not produce 2 action points, which is pretty important to note. The great thing about Twin Drive is the fact that because it has 2 times boost in its card, it speeds up the effect that requires you to boost, like Pulse Wave Harpoon and maximum velocity. So essentially you could...
Well.
Sorry?
High Octane as well. It's a third thing that this helps out.
Right, and also High Octane. So it's a card that makes it easier for you to pull off these big combo turns while really requiring less cards, and that's pretty relevant. That's pretty huge.
Magnetic Lockwave. I think Yiorgos was very high on this card, and then I don't know if that's still the case. Are you still super high on this card?
I was super high on this card, first of all, because I thought the cost was XX, not XXX, and that's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. I mean, it's a pretty interesting card, but at the moment it requires too much of you to destroy a single equipment. There are some combo uses about pulling an equipment and then forcing the opponent to destroy it or something, but at the moment, none of the decks exist that care so much about their equipment that this whole thing actually makes any sense.
System Failure, top to bottom, this is a sideboard card for the mech matchup. If you can, I quite like this in a mirror of, like, it's a super grindy, you get to that late game, everybody's blocking everything, and this is just unblockable damage to close out the game, but other than that, it's yellow, it blocks for 2, it's a sideboard card that has that one fringe use.
It's an interesting card in Mechanologist mirrors, but we need to see how the meta develops. If a deck exists that puts a billion Steam counters on board, this card is great. If not...
System Reset, this is a great combo card for -IO. Just take all of your stuff, blink them up and down, they come back in with their Steam counters, you crank everything, you get a bunch of action points, you load your pistol a million times, and you can shoot with it without having to spend any extra resources. Other than this, I don't think this is doing anything, but for that specific build, I think this is fine. It even blocks for 3.
Yeah, it's a decent card on that combo type of Dust deck. It might be really interesting, so yeah.
Fabricate, the Mechanologist Art of War, kind of. Not quite Art of War, but let's see. We have some modes that we can choose 2 from. This costs 0, which is already a step up from Art of War, but it is a red. We can equip a base equipment with Proto in its name from our inventory. This comes back to what we explained before, with a piece being destroyed, and then this allowing you to pull another piece from your inventory to replace it, so you can keep your EVO train going. EVO permanents you control get +1 defense until end of turn. An interesting interaction with this one is with the instant speed EVOs that have a defense value but no temper or blade break or anything like that. You can freely block with them and nothing will happen to them. You just get one block value for free. Obviously still works with your temper stuff and all that jazz. You can put this under an EVO you control. This is relevant for the instant speed EVOs or the other ones that require you to banish a card from underneath to get some sort of effect. Like with Facebreaker, this effectively translates to +2 damage. So it's quite good there. And the last one is the Teklovasen version of that last Art of War effect of banishing an EVO from hand to draw a card. So in Teklovasen, you banish it, it's still in your hand, you can still play it, and then you draw a card to replace it with. So overall, I think this is a Teklovasen card more often than not, and the main modes would be probably the +1 defense and the banishable one. That's where I'm at so far with this.
I love this card and I love what this card does to the deck. It's a 0 cost effectively that replaces itself that might give you some value. And the cost of running this card is that it's an instant, and if you get it early without another EVO equipment, or if you want to keep the EVO equipment for some reason to do something else, you have a semi-dead card in your hand. I love the utility these type of cards produce. And I really like Fabricate. I don't think ever we will see a Teklovasen deck without at least a few copies of this card. I think it's a pretty powerful Teklovasen card.
Yep, and enables those plays with perhaps running a Tunic in the slot. You block with it, it breaks, and then you can equip something from the side. But that depends on how many slots you want to dedicate it to your inventory to have effectively useless proto pieces to this effect. Yeah, it definitely is a card that is going to see some play in Teklovasen. All right, back to our cycles. Bulbar, again, overpower is a whatever keyword for me. I think this is not a constructed card, so we can just move on.
Yeah, I don't think these cards will ever see the light of day in a constructed deck.
Alright, Spring a Leak is another effect that is useful for the mirror. I don't think this, again, is a constructed thing. Cool art though, but yeah.
I mean, if for some reason the metagame becomes really relevant about stopping the opponent of having steam counters, I could see Spring a Leak Red having a few slots, either as sideboard or having a first value main deck cards. But the rest of them, no.
Alright, so we have a small cycle of cards that care if you've boosted 2 or more times. These are kind of mini max Vs. So by boosting twice, you get some type of effect. Here you would get a 3 cost 8 if you've boosted twice. It isn't that much of a value, but I could maybe see it in a deck that requires more of this max V type of effect. But overall, it's kind of low in power level, I think, to consistently see any play.
Yeah, if for some reason there is a heavy max deck that wants to boost twice and then finish with a big attack, maybe you might run these cards, but most of the time it's just better to boost a single time, make a hyperdriver, attack with a weapon and arsenal a card, rather than try and play these type of cards. So the only exception might be Smash and Grab, but I think probably there are better sideboard options. If you're looking to fight off against Mechanologist, there are better sideboard options. If for some reason there is an item meta, maybe you could run Smash and Grab, okay. But that's it.
Alright, Gigawatt is the first, I think, 2-block that, the first pump that has a +4 that we've seen from X. I don't think we have any +4s before. It works on weapons, but it's not until end of turn, so you can't do anything insane in a pistol plan with this. Just give it +4 until end of turn, just go crazy. It's just the next one. Again, the pumps, I don't think they're great for constructed.
I think they are, just
at least not this one.
Draft cards. Mechanologists don't really have hit effects, so you don't really care about pumping, and with boost you can almost always have go again. So why pay 1 to do a 4 without a 3-block? I don't know, it's just,
Alright, Firewall. This is Sink Below, kind of, not really, that we could be running in our deck. It's a red that blocks for 4, but it's not a reaction. So I think the red one is the only one that anyone might ever consider in an ultra defensive Mechanologist deck. I could definitely see this, for example, in that Pistol Plan dash, Tree Frog dash, that just wants pistols. It's a block, and yeah. But so the fact that it might put an item in the bottom is kind of bad in that type of deck. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing you get out of this card, rather than Sink Below or Fate Foreseen, is the fact that it's Mechanologist, so you can boost it. Yeah. So we are looking at a 0/4/4 card that cannot go into Arsenal, and it wants to be played in a heavy boost deck. I don't think such a deck exists. Don't think such a deck exists. So, yeah, I don't think Firewall will see play.
All right, 0 to 50 is slower than 0 to 60, so it's bad. So we're probably going to move on.
Yeah, I mean, if for some reason, the only thing I want to say is that if for some reason there is an ultra aggressive meta game where Max or the Mechanologists do not care at all for the deck size because all of the games end on turn 3, you might include all of the 0 cost boost cards that you can get, and on that universe 0 to 50 red might see some play. I don't think we are on that universe though. So yeah, let's move on.
The same thing that we've said with 0 to 50 I think applies to a lot of the other cycles. Razzle Dazzle is just worse zipper hit. So there are 1/4/4s with boost that have effects, so I don't think this is going to see any play. Same with Full Tilt. This is a worse throttle, so again, bad. Gas Guzzler, it's a 3 cost. We haven't had 3 costs boosts before, but again, this is a worse throttle, so
I mean, yeah, the only thing with Gas Guzzler is if for some reason the Mechanologist boost decks want to go heavier and they want to be more heavy on blues and want to do more heavy attacks for some reason, Gas Guzzler might see some play, but it's a fringe playable at best, and only the red one, obviously.
Alright, Crankshaft is a reprint. I think you're going to include some blue in your max deck to keep those counters on hyperdrivers active and on the board. Perhaps more, depending on the build and the ratios, you can have some more, but since we have another card they're going to look at later, I think maybe the blue one is the only one that you care about.
I mean, the blue one is the highest contender if you want to do, the hyperdriver matters thing, and maybe if you are fine with losing 1 value in order to have the crankshaft red, if you are fine with losing 1 offensive value, to maybe include some more of these effects.
Alright, Big Bertha, same as Crankshaft, adds a counter to your things. The blue one is fine. Resource card that adds some counters. Maybe you sometimes run the red, it's a 6, but the fact that it costs 3 is a bit on the heavy side, so I'm leaning more towards that blue one.
I could see something like I could see Big Bertha Red being run in a max deck that does not want to boost too many times a turn, that maybe wants only to boost once, maybe, because it fits the curve of Pizza Blue, Big Bertha, Pizza Blue, Hyperdriver, attack with weapon. But still, I don't think that's likely. I think with boost you are looking to attack a lot, and 3 cost is not helping you.
Alright. Jumpstart, another reprint. This in a max deck is effectively your 4th, 5th, and 6th copy of Zipper Hit. I think you're gonna run it in that sort of deck, an aggressive max deck. Yeah, I don't think it sees much play anywhere else. Rev Up, it's the same effect as before, but now we get a throttle, extra throttles for our max deck. Is this better?
Oh. Throttle is one of the better cards to include. I mean, Throttle is probably one of the best cards, and it's pretty easy to always have a hyperdriver on board while playing max. So I guess we could see Rev Up being played in some max deck, Red Up Red. But apart from that, I don't think we'll see anything else.
All right, data link. I think this falls into that 0 to 50 category. The effect is quite marginal. If we need more 0 for 3s, this might see play, but other than that,
It's a 0 for 3 with minor upside that might be relevant sometimes, but I don't think you win games by running a bunch of 0 for 3s that block for 3.
All right, drive-through data is a better high-speed impact for the red one. The effect is marginally more relevant because if you're boosting after this, the opt is kind of irrelevant. Yeah, it might see some play in that type of slot.
I think it is drive-through data red might see some play because it's sometimes relevant to opt the top card of your deck if you are looking to banish a hyperdriver, for instance. So it might see if you are missing the curve, and because that drive-through data red is a breakpoint, it might see some play, but apart from that, yellow and blue are completely unplayable.
Sprocket Rocket, this in the perhaps in the dash deck is more copies of 0 to 60, but other than that, I think it's not very interesting for most constructed formats.
Yeah, I think it's a draft card. We can just move on.
All right,
and
same
so
with Dumpster Dive. Yeah.
Breaking points are always slightly better on boosting cards,
yeah.
But still maybe not the best card in that slot.
Yeah. Expedite gives us though a unique effect. We have an on hit that puts items into play. If you get this on hit and you do have that item, the value is insanely good. It's like a free action point and free card into play. Expedite isn't likely to do it because it's a 3, but so I think we should just skip this whole card altogether and go over to the more playable Met X because we are at that breaking point as you mentioned before.
Yeah, so having access to that effect is pretty relevant, and I think both Metex and maybe the Expedite might see some play in Max and maybe some play in Dash, maybe both, maybe none. And Metex, the fact that it's a breaking point is probably the best one. And also Metex is really interesting with Dash because you can pitch a blue, play that, and with the 2 resources, it's the perfect resources in order to activate Dash and play an item off the top. You can pitch a blue, pay 1 for Metex, and use the remaining 2 to play a 1-cost item off the top of your deck. So the curve feels pretty great.
Alright, so red playable, the rest not so much. Alright, Outpace and a lot of the other ones I'm going to see now are not constructed playable, so we're just going to mention they exist and swiftly move on. Outpace, yeah, Lay Waste, Fender Bender by Yuki Lee Bender, Panel Beater. So now we get to an interesting one with Underloop. This is the sequel to Overloop. And I think this is a fine card to replace High Speed Impact with, the red one, because it keeps a card into your deck potentially. So it's not a completely irrelevant hit effect. If you need a 1 for 4, I think this makes the cut more often than not in a regular boost deck.
Underloop red is interesting, the rest are just completely unplayable.
Yeah. Overloop, didn't see much of any play recently, so it's a reprint as well. Gas Up. This is an interesting pump. If we have a Hyperdrive in Banish and we get it with this, I think the value proposal of this is just through the roof. But to have this happen means that we can't be running Hyper X and we need to have either boosted or scrapped a Hyperdriver. So it requires some setup. But if you get it through, I think it's very good. It's one of the few pumps that we actually care about.
Yeah, the value is pretty insane on the Gas Up if you actually get a red Hyperdriver, but exactly as you said, we already have many other usages of Hyperdrivers being banished. So, and the main one is the new Legendary helmet. So, I don't think Gas Up will see a lot of play for that reason mainly.
More pumps. The ceiling of this is a 0-cost pump for 4 in a max deck. Again, for constructed reasons, this isn't that great. It requires some setup, it's not guaranteed value, and it's just a pump in a deck that doesn't have on hits. So Recharge helps keeps hyperdrivers around for longer, I guess. Do we care about this effect? Most often than not, I don't think we do.
I think recharge, if there is any chance for Max to run any non-attack card that boosts the attack, it has to be recharged. I mean, putting a steam counter on hyperdriver allows you to maintain a hyperdriver for an extra turn, so it makes it way easier to line up your hyperdrivers to when you want to transform on Mechanoid or have them all at one to get the full value out of them on the same time and stuff. So recharge red could see some play, but yellow and blue probably not so much because the math is not there.
Yeah. And this card exists, and
Let's run.
We're now at the expansion slot. So these are all going to be, first of all, the expansion slot is a great idea from LSS. Yiorgos has been ranting and raving about it in the streams. It's such a great opportunity to see what they do with it in future sets. It allows for cards that shouldn't be in a draft environment be printed. If the meta needs a specific tool to help it balance out for a class, this is the way to do it. And I'm super excited that this as a thing exists.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Streak Razors is an amazing card. Let's read that first of all. So
yeah.
It has the normal assassin equipment thing we've seen before, where if it's in the graveyard you may destroy 2 silvers you control and you can equip that again from the graveyard, which is great. And the active effect is it has Battle Worn and 1 block, like all of these cycle of assassin equipment cards, and it reads attack reaction, pay 2, destroy Streak Razors, target attack action card defending an assassin attack gets -1. This is really great and something that honestly maybe not Uzuri so much, but Arachne was definitely missing. To have a way to actually be able to push through these annoying effects and start getting his silver again.
Yeah. It's definitely more so of an Arachne card. But again, Arachne needs other types of help, not so much in the equipment slot. But this is a tool that's great to have. I would think that any assassin would want this in their binder just to be ready when that support comes in for more silver stuff to get that in there. But for now, I think Flick Knives in the more playable assassin deck is going to be what sees more play. Now, this one is something. Already Dead is a popper in a deck that definitely needed more of them, and the effect itself is it breaks how the opponent thinks about how they're going to block. If they use any type of important equipment with Battle Worn, or God forbid you're Teklovos and you use an EVO to block with this, then you're in for some trouble. What else is there to say about this card? It's incredible with Uzuri specifically.
First of all, it's important to note that Uzuri decks were in such dire need of 2/4/6 3-block cards that they were literally running Nourishing Emptiness that was turned off turn 0, and they were still running this card and they were winning events with Nourishing Emptiness in their deck, because they literally had no other option of a 2-cost, 6-power, 3-block red card. And now, not only they get a specific class card that actually might generate some silver, that's actually quite relevant and help with fatigue because it's a contract, it actually gives a new angle of attack in the Uzuri deck. And it's something that we've seen Dorinthia do a few years back when Dorinthia was starting to get cards, where Dorinthia slowly started to have answers to every single line of play the opponent could do. So then actually you could bluff. And Uzuri slowly starts to get to the same point where at some point they will have answers to every single line of kind of block you're going to do. So out bluffing them will be way harder because they will have tools to punish you in any different scenario.
Yeah. All right, great tool for assassins, and another great tool that is a sideboard tool at that with brutes. A lot of people kind of were disappointed with this card because it's not, oh my god, it breaks brute, just obviously right off the bat. But I think especially for heading into a mech heavy meta, why not run some of these cards in your sideboard as a brute? Yellow 6, they like their yellow 6s. The fact that it doesn't block doesn't really matter because you want to play it. In the matchup you're going to be bringing it in, you don't want to waste it. You do want to get that effect. So yeah, I think this is a fine sideboard card if ever mechs become a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if that card could block for 3, this could be not exactly power creep, but a decent upgrade to the yellow 3 cost 6 power cards Brute had access to. But since this card doesn't block, it's a great sideboard card because exactly as you said, it's a great card for sideboard that gives you a lot of tempo versus Mechanologist if we enter a new Mechanologist meta. So it's a really interesting card to have access to if you are a Brute main.
Tectonic Rift. This is not Awakening is the first thing. The art kind of looks like it, but the effect is not quite there. I can seeing some plain Valda perhaps in Blitz to get that dominate effect for sure, but the fact that this is a 2-block and like it's a 2-card bank 3 resources for next turn most of the time, and I don't know, it's not great. It's not great. And at best, I guess, of a 3-card hand, you can swing Anathos afterwards. The power level is kind of low, so you need a reason for the Seismic Surges to be there. And I think the only deck that might care is Valda. She's already not great, but you get some value there.
I mean, the way Guardian is right now, I don't think you really care about that. And the best thing about Guardian at the moment is that every single one of your cards block for 3. And that's a huge power thing about Guardian. So adding a card that blocks 2 needs, Rouse of the Ancients is one of the cards that do not block 3 in a Guardian deck. And Rouse of the Ancients, when played, gives you an insane amount of value. Or let's say Pummel Blue. It's another 2-block card that gets played in Guardian decks because when it pushes through damage, it might push through a CNC, it might discard a card, it gets a huge value. Tectonic Rift is not there, so unless we see a new hero or a new effect or a new type of Guardian card that actually care about the amount of Seismic Surge tokens you have, like you said, Valda, I don't think Tectonic Rift will ever see play in Guardian because the blue Guardian non-attack slot is just so competitive where you cannot put a card that, maybe you make some Seismic Surges.
Yeah. Alright, Wax Off. I am not very high on this card, but I think you are. The reason that I'm not very high on this is that you need to be playing some bad cards to make a medium card good. If this works, and you're against a go wide deck, obviously it's great. Zen State is incredible for those go wide decks. But if you're against a tall deck, this doesn't do all that much. It's a 2-card combo that can save, I don't know, like 8 life maybe against the super wide hero over the course of 2 turns. But I don't know. I'm not very high on it. Let's see what you think. Why are you so excited about it?
First of all, okay, let's get this thing out first. Wax Off is not an auto-include in any ninja deck, obviously. I mean, it's not like this type of cards where it's like we've said with Uzuri before, where the new contract is a strictly upgrade to the Nourishing Emptiness they used to run. No, Wax Off is not that type of card. Wax Off, in order to be usable, needs more specific meta games, and it needs to target heroes and matchups that the effect is actually relevant. And I don't think it needs to be wide heroes. It needs, though, to be heroes where Wax On is actually relevant. If Wax On hits, if Wax On blocks a 0-cost card, so you get a 0 for 5, you can get a 0 for 5 from Wax On. having a blue 2-block card is not something new for ninjas. So having, on that scenario, having a blue card that blocks 2 most of the time, but sometimes might block 2 and give you a Zen state token, it's insane. I mean, the numbers are way off. And maybe that might change after Lexi hits Living Legend, because it's obviously really strong into Lexi. But the numbers are insane, again, on very specific meta games, if there are a lot of attacks that are attacking for 0. The main reason I love this card is that the cost of running a blue 0 cost in your deck that blocks for 2 is really low for Ninja. That's why I'm so hyped about this card.
Okay. Well, I hope I'm wrong, and this card is great, but for now, I am personally not sold on it, but maybe, if a bunch of Rune Chants are the meta, or if some other, like Fi comes back, that sort of thing, then maybe this is where ninjas want to be at, or maybe a full defensive ninja.
We've seen some ninjas completely, some Fi specifically, to run the list with 15 combo cards on the blue slot, in order to run 3 red flick flags for Lexi. I mean, that cost was way higher rather than to just add 3 blue wax offs and 3 wax ons if it's relevant. We've already seen ninjas commit so many cards in their blue slots, so that's why I'm hyped about wax off.
Alright, Emboldened Blade for warriors to keep those mind games going. If you're up against the Dorinthia right now, and you have that defense reaction in your hand, and you're gonna put in your arsenal because you're like, okay, I now have it in arsenal, they can't do any tricks, I'm safe. The fact that this card exists changes all of that. Now you're never sure when you're safe to just bank that defense reaction, because if you do and they have it, the value that they get is so massive that it puts you on the back foot massively. And just the whole mind games that this card exists is, I think, better than what it does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing we said with Zuri before, it's the same thing with Dorinthia and Warrior in general, where a huge part, if you've played into typical Dawnblade Dorinthia, what you do 90% of the time is that you try to block them out and arsenal a D-React to be able to sometimes block without triggering reprise. That's not the case anymore. You cannot simply have the same game plan whole game. I'm just going to block, arsenal a D-React, and next turn I'm going to block without triggering reprise. That was a really easy line of play as a Guardian, for instance, into Dorinthia. That's no longer the case. That single card, the existence of a single card, completely negates a whole play pattern that a lot of mid-range decks love to have into Dorinthia. Is it good to push Dorinthia into being one of the better decks? I don't know, probably not, but it helps a lot to... It really helps a lot to push Dorinthia into being one of the better decks again.
Yeah, we're going to see how this affects deck building in general, because a lot of the sideboard or inventory slots were dedicated to some defense reactions for the decks that wanted to play that mid-range defensive plan into Warrior. We'll see if those change for other tools, but like more Oasis Respites, for example, because this can't destroy those. But again, those are cost resources from hand to activate. It's going to be interesting to see how those inventory slots develop just because of this card's existence. Right, Riptide is getting some love with Intoxicating Shot. Despite the fact that this card has been printed, I still don't think that Riptide is going to do much of anything. I like the direction of the card and the intent behind the design. I'm not a fan of the hero in general though, and I don't think this card will push him to the point of relevancy yet.
Yeah, Riptide needs a lot more help than just a good blue filler card. He needs probably the other things. He needs more ways to get above and beyond, not be consistent. That's not what Riptide is missing. But still, it's exactly as you said, the fact that maybe you could use Courage and Quicken token to your advantage is a really interesting way of thinking about Riptide in general. So I love this card, I love the direction. I don't think Riptide will be any good though still.
No. All right, Sonata Phantasmia, double X card that makes a whole bunch of rune chants and is yet another Viscerai specialization. I don't know, are we on 4, 5 right now? I've lost count. Anyway, I think this is, the effect itself is that it is a blue non-attack 3 block that can be put in your deck, and it helps those dud hands that you have a bunch of non-attacks in it. It helps those. It fuels all of the rest of your stuff. And if you manage to get some type of pitch stack or anything to get that effect in the late game, it's backbreaking and buys you a big turn. But overall, I think this is going to be played because it is a good blue.
Yeah, I mean, back in the early metas of Viscerai and Briar into Oldheim, Briars and Viscerais were one of the easiest decks to fatigue because you knew by the moment you got to second cycle, their damage output get instantly 0 almost. I mean, Viscerai specifically most of the time run 18 to 22, maybe 24 blues, depending on the build, and the moment you hit that second cycle, the blues literally do nothing. The numbers are way off. Sonata Phantasmia really helps with that type of problem that Viscerai had. And also because of Viscerai has a lot of arcane damage, probably his opponent was always ahead on fatigue versus Viscerai. And that was a real problem with Viscerai some of the times. And I love Sonata Phantasmia because it really helps with a relevant problem Viscerai had. How? By giving you a 3-block non-attack blue card that can actually be played turn 1 for a small amount of value. I mean, this card is not a huge player by itself, but checks a lot of boxes that Viscerai had huge gaps in it, and that's why I think this card will see a lot of play.
Contest the Minefield. While Ice Thunder is around, I think this is quite useful. I am not entirely sold on it yet, but it's kind of another I was about to call it a Channel Lake Frigid. It's not Channel Lake Frigid, but it fills that type of role. That off of a blue and a tunic resource, you can get your 3 points of the Waning Moon and then get your opponent down to less resources for their offensive turn and less resources for their defensive turn on the following turn when you get to do some stuff. While not affecting you, because you get to play this at instant speed, obviously at the opponent's turn. I'm not 100% sold on it because it's not offensive by itself. It also blocks for 2, so I think it can see some play. I'm not excited about this in Kano at all because it messes up your pitch if you get it off in your combo turn off of the Kano ability. But yeah, I think Icelander might make some use of this.
Yeah, I mean, for Kano, it honestly makes 0 sense almost. Maybe it's a decent card, it's an interesting card to exist if you can put it off in instant speed at the opponent's turn. I don't know why I'm so hyped about this card. I think this card is super great in Icelander. Maybe not in the main deck because the blues in Icelander are heavily contested, and putting a non-ice, non-3-block card, probably it's pretty hard to do that. But from the Guardian side, it really helps them develop their plan, and they disrupt me without me having any say in that. And I think that it's a really important part, that the opponent has no say. They will play their next turn with 3 cards. They cannot do anything about it. They cannot discard the red. They cannot, they cannot overpitch. They cannot skip their attack. They will play with 1 less card no matter what they're setting up. And that's why I think this card is so interesting. Maybe in the slower matchups, okay, it doesn't help with tempo, but I really love this card.
Alright, the last card that was spoiled, Phantom Tidemaw is having some cool art and is going to look great in your binder until a new illusionist is printed that cares about Ward. I don't think this exists right now, so it's yeah, I don't know what this does. Maybe you can enlighten me.
We are getting there. We have all the words and the new head, and we could generate ponder tokens and all that, and we generate resources. No, okay. That's totally not working. I don't know what can happen that you can actually... Ward is such a greedy mechanic. I mean, the whole direction that Illusionist was headed, that if you can protect these ward cards, you gain more value. I don't know in what universe of Flesh and Blood that can exist. I mean, Illusionist, the more cards get printed, feel like that they become more and more these... If there is a slow metagame, if there is a really slow metagame, Illusionists just dominate everything. But we never have such metagames there. We haven't had such metagames so far that you have that if you block 9 that no damage will go through because the opponent needs to set up. No, most of the time, and many decks exist in the metagame where they can just throw all of their cards into your head, and Ward is never relevant there. These type of payoffs with Ward, and if you protect them and stuff. So
yeah. And Vambrace still exists.
And
so
Vambrace still exists, yeah. So I don't think Phantom Tidemo will see. We might see some play. It's an interesting card. It's a cool idea, but we are probably getting the groundwork for a new Illusionist hero, as you said. That's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. All right, this is going to be the bane of a lot of people's existence come the next meta. This card by itself generates so much value in Dromai, it's insane. It's going to make you a whole bunch of ash. It's going to filter your hand to get to whatever you're trying to get to. It's going to let you play out multiple dragons that might be difficult to deal with, or just dump a bunch of things on the board in one turn off of the fact that you're giving up a headpiece that some decks were already giving up without this card existing. So the fact that it's out there is going to just boost an already good deck to, I think, an S tier deck with the new format.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly as you said. People were already running the Royal Crown in order to get the gold to start their engine running with the Ash. So Tome of Imperial Flame really helps in that. The only thing with the Tome of Imperial Flame, it's not a Fi card, it's obviously a Dromai card. It's a great Dromai card. I don't know if you can afford to run no blocks and lose the 2 or 3 value out of your headpiece into aggressive decks. That's my only downside, but I think it's a great way to establish your dominance and make Dromai a deck more consistent, and make it so when the opponent is trying to fatigue you, to actually kick away these bad, defense reactions and actually get easier and start digging for your anti-fatigue stuff, or if you're looking for a specific dragon, to actually dig deeper. I mean, it ticks a lot of slots in the Dromai deck, and I think it's going to be a pretty great deck in that, a pretty great card in that deck. Yeah,
and Emperor as well.
And Emperor,
he's going to make some good use of this. This is a 1-card CNC. No other deck can do it. Just block 9 and then come with play this, pitch 2 reds because you're Emperor, and then activate your Furnace because you played this as a red card, and then 3 resources, activate Emperor for a CNC. That's, I think, the most above rate card we've seen, a 1-card 6 that requires 0 setup. So yeah, better in Dromai because she's obviously better than Emperor, but for those Emperor players in Blitz, you have this as a new tool. We have a 4th Dust. This one I think is a lot more relevant than some of the other ones. Because you get to put it on Chromai, that gives you that action point. Effectively, this causes you to have a Mirror Guy on board with your Chromai, and makes the opponent's blocking decisions a bit weirder, and forces some damage through with the Chromai and those action points. So I think this has good potential if we get to a meta that has a bunch of poppers that wants that Chromai to stick for that pivot turn.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of I've played a lot of matchups versus Fatigue Dromai, and what they try to do most of the time as anti-fatigue is to try and set up turns where they have multiple cards that you need to deal with on the same turn, and that most of the time means passing Mirage, Miragai, and Chromai. And dust from the Chrome caverns is a new way to actually develop Chromai as a singular threat, and that's really important because you can set up the dust, the opponent cannot interact with it, and next turn you can go something like Chromai into attack into double passing Mirage, or Chromai into attack into Miraga into passing Mirage. So it's so easier to develop a lot of threats if you know you can secure the non-phantasm keyword on your Chromai.
It's more of a sideboard card because I don't think you would be running it into everything. But yeah, it does help set up those board states that have that inevitability to secure that end game. So I do like the card, but sideboard. Warband of Bologna. This is a headpiece for Bolton. No other warrior can run it, obviously, because it's a light piece. And gives him extra defense because you get 2 and then 1 if you want it, and it also fixes those hands that don't have that starter charge card. It is a bit resource intensive to do this, but I think it really pushes Bolton to be a much more adept deck at doing the things that it wants to do, which is to charge and get value. So yeah, I think Bolton is going to love this card forever.
It's a strictly upgrade card for Bolton. It's probably one of the best headpiece probably you can run at the moment for Bolton, and he really needed that. And he really loves the fact that it's a 2-block card, so he can, have that full armor thing going on for him. So I don't think that there is much to say. It fixes some of your bad turns, and that's pretty good enough for Bolton, because Bolton's biggest problem always was probably consistency. So that helps with consistency at almost 0 cost, at running a 3 armor head equipment. Strictly upgrade.
Alright, great name, great art, terrible card.
This card, I love this card because it's just the name Slay. I really will crop this card and use it everywhere. Slay, it's perfect. Also, it's a card by Othnas Nikolaidis that I thought did not have any arts this set, but apparently he has this amazing card. But yeah, I mean, this card is not... I think it's just a flavor card. We love flavor cards. Sideboard at best. I don't think any shadow hero needed help to deal with Prism. I don't think so. I don't think we will ever see this card played. But it's an interesting concept and it's an interesting card to exist. But
yeah,
more for the story.
It's a flavor thing.
It's a flavor thing. Yeah.
Alright, Tuning is getting a reprint.
That's
it's a great card.
I didn't know. That's a no.
Sees play in like 90% of the decks.
I've never seen this card before. Let me read that.
No. It's one of the best stuff that they reprinted. I wish like CNC and I don't know, Art of War got a reprint, but if anything got one, I'm glad it's this because the prices were starting to get insane, and it's needed for the game to grow as more players come into the game. If you say like it's a staple and it's $300, you're gonna turn away a lot of players. So this getting reprinted has caused previous printings to already drop, and I can see this being like half that price that it used to be before, and it helps more players get into the game. So it's great.
Yeah, LSS, please keep reprinting that card until it's $50, please. Please do that.
I have a handful of cards from the TCC product that deserve a quick mention that could see some play. Professor Teklovasen is the young alternate version of Teklovasen and has a different abilities. You can still play EVOs from Banish Zone, but they cost, but your EVOs cost 1 less. This is quite interesting for Blitz because it makes those 4 costs now 3 costs. So you don't get to cheat on the action point, but you get to cheat on the number of cards you need to get them out there. So you can play them much faster. Is this relevant enough for Blitz? Perhaps, because this gives you a whole more card to block with, or to arsenal. You don't need 2 cards to play that 4 cost EVO out there. Yeah, it's worth to keep in mind that he exists as a different avenue to tackle the EVO problem for Blitz specifically.
I think I'm not sure if the Teklovosan is going to be in general good in Blitz, and I don't think costing 1 less might be the thing, because if you want to play the Teklovosan, probably you are looking towards something like Rush, Singularity maybe, but yeah, maybe a lower cost, you know, more boosting, get some cheaper cards, do that 2 cards play, you say, might be the way to go, yeah.
All right, Civic Steps. Guardians finally got their leg piece, maybe. So far, Guardians were happy to run, or not, they weren't happy, but they were running Iron Rot in the leg slot just to get that 1 block. This gives you a overall 3 blocking piece, but the downside is quite hefty, depending on the opponent. Giving a Quicken token against decks like Guardians maybe isn't that relevant, but giving the token against stuff like Warriors, or even maybe Dromize that they can go with a Dust Up, or an E-Strike, pumping it, getting go again for free, is a bit too difficult to gauge, and you're giving the opponent too much value out of that Quicken token depending on the matchup. I don't know if everyone is going to default to this because of the blocking value. You can be smart of when to block with it to make the Quicken less impactful, but because it sticks around, even if the opponent isn't going to have a turn next turn, they can still bank that Quicken for whenever it's relevant. So it's interesting that it exists. I don't know if it's a slam dunk.
Honestly, I've seen a lot of people being hyped about Civic Steps. I think this card is completely unplayable. I mean, the sideboard slots for Guardian are so heavily contested, specifically on equipment, that a lot of times you need to cut really key cards in order to include more equipment. And I don't think you can include a slightly better legs equipment that you are going to use on some matchups. Okay, legs are probably your weakest matchup, so if you're playing into a Rune Blade, you transform your boots into Arcane Barrier. So 30% of the matchup, let's say, you already do that. So where are you going to use that? On the rest of the field, but the rest of the field might be an aggressive deck, so you might not want. So what are you going to do? Are you going to include 2 different pieces of equipment at the leg slot in order to have 2 more block? I mean, I don't think, I could see universes where this is played, and I could see metagames where versus the Teklovosan, for instance, where the Quicken is not relevant, to actually have that might help, but I don't think it would be the correct choice.
So that concludes the constructed video. This has taken forever and a half to complete, and we're going to be jumping right into the limited that you can find in Yiorgos' channel. Make sure to follow that link. Go right over to the limited set review. We're going to be going over archetypes and the cards themselves, and yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. We'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Remember to like both of our channels, the videos, give us a subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you there.